They apparated through the fireplace and arrived in Marne-la-Vallée, 32 kilometers outside Paris. The new theme park, built the previous year, was the second Disneyland in the world and had quickly become a Muggle favorite. Stepping into it felt like stepping into a fairy tale. Cartoon mascots chased one another through the paths and sent Fleur racing after them, laughing. The palace gardens barely held her attention. She only glanced at the distant castle twice. It was the western cowboy town by the main entrance that made her eyes light up. Fleur threw herself into every attraction: roller coasters, pirate ships, carousels. The twists and the adrenaline wiped away her worries. Roger pointed out Mickey and Donald, and Fleur clumsily joined an interactive show. He snapped photo after photo of her, grinning. In the evening, they watched a breathtaking fireworks display. Sparks blossomed against the night sky like scattered stars. "Thank you," Fleur whispered. "Try it," Roger said, handing her a white cowboy hat. She perched it on her head, patted the wide brim, and looked up at the fireworks. Happiness swelled in her chest. She raised her wand and spoke softly. A silvery white light streamed from its tip. Her expecto patronum had succeeded. The light shivered, but no Patronus form emerged. "Congratulations," Roger said, "but the Patronus hasn't shown itself yet. We'll see about that later. Corvus won't be dying anytime soon anyway." He checked his watch. "It's time to go." Fleur nodded. "What will my Patronus look like?" "Usually they take animal forms," Roger explained. "The shape ties to a witch or wizard's deepest feelings in nature. Dumbledore's is a phoenix. His family has always been tied to them." "Then why is yours a crow? Is it a bloodline thing?" she asked. "Maybe," he said, thinking, "but I think that's only part of it. Crows suit certain wizards. They're clever, alert. Ancient cultures link them with mystery and magic." Back at the manor's fireplace, Barbara hurried over. "Fleur, was it successful?" "I learned expecto patronum," Fleur said. "The spell worked, but the Patronus itself didn't appear." Barbara's face dimmed. "There's a banquet tonight. Corvus VI has decided to finalize his will this evening." Barbara was a direct descendant of Corvus VI, but several older sisters stood between her and the title. The line for Corvus VII was fragile, the Lestrange inheritance was vast, and any extra share mattered. She glanced at Jessica. When Jessica only shook her head, Barbara sighed. "Let's go to the banquet first." Lestrange Manor loomed over them like rotten earth in an ancient wood, decayed, oppressive, the air tinged with a dry, musty reek. An elderly housemaid held an oil lamp at the front door. When she smiled, her teeth were blackened and broken, and the sight sent a chill up Roger's spine. "Mom, why does this place feel like a graveyard?" he whispered. 100 eyes seemed to watch from the dark. Jessica hurried him inside, uneasy herself. Once, decades ago, this place had thrummed with life. What had happened to it since? Barbara only leaned closer and murmured, "I heard Corvus has been researching death. When you see him, old Kevis, don't be frightened." Roger's hand tightened on his wand. "Is he scary?" He suspected the decay smelled of something darker than rot. They entered the banquet hall. Half the family had already arrived. Distant relatives offered cold glances and thin smiles. Talk of the inheritance had set everyone on edge. No one wanted to be friendly. Every face was a rival. The room was hushed, except for the creak of chairs and the hushed footsteps of the house staff laying out dish after dish. A deep, hoarse coughing rose from the back of the room, and a long shadow, lit by candlelight, shuffled forward. Corvus VI leaned heavily on a cane. "Is everyone present?" His voice scratched like bone on wood, but it carried across the hall. No one went to help him. They waited for him to make his slow way to the head seat. Roger stared. The old man looked less like a living person than a stripped mummy, skin blackened and drawn tight to his bones, hollows where flesh should be, bloodshot eyes that rolled and fixed on the crowd. A prickle of fear ran through Roger. Dark magic, he thought. This reeks of dark arts. "Jessica?" Corvus croaked when he reached the head of the table. He turned to the woman beside Roger. "I didn't expect you to return." A thin, almost amused smile creased his face. "I didn't expect the news of my impending death would travel to Britain. Is this your son? When you left France, he would have been about that age." Those around the table shot looks at Jessica and her boy. Envy and calculation showed in their eyes. "Perhaps they were too poor in Britain," the witch across from them muttered. "When there's an inheritance to be divided, they all come running." Belle, Barbara snapped. They returned to see family. Jessica still carries Lestrange blood, Belle sneered. If that's so, why not bring over every Lestrange from Britain? Then the inheritance will be split even thinner. She glanced at Corvus. Baffled, the old man still clung to life. If more heirs turned up, everyone's share would shrink. Clang, clang. Corvus tapped the table with his cane until the chatter died away. The room sank into a heavier silence. He lifted his head and recited with a dry, practiced voice, "Crows do not peck out the eyes of another crow." The family motto hung in the air. He unfolded a parchment and spoke. "My life approaches its end. There is no clear heir to the title of Corvus VII. The family fortune will be divided among you." A maid brought a silver tray with a rolled scroll. Heads leaned forward, breathing quickened. Corvus read on, slowly, as if testing each word. He named the properties: this manor, vast estates in Africa and South America, millions of galleons in Gringotts, then jewels, rare magical items, artifacts. With every item he listed, the hunger in the room sharpened. Roger watched the gathering faces and felt the heat of their greed. Corvus paused, a slow, wheezing sigh escaping him. "All this will be yours when I am gone," he said, "but with so many claimants, how should I divide it?" The Lestrange inheritance was enormous, and the right to distribute it rested entirely with the skeletal old man at the head of the table. In theory, Corvus VI could have waved his wand and apportioned galleons to every relative present. Even distant cousins could have been place-hated with a few coins. Instead, he sat there like a gaunt, ancient crow, eyes flicking over the assembled family as he let out a dry, hoarse laugh. No one could quite read him. "Uncle," Belle said, flashing a triumphant look at the others, "the inheritance should follow bloodline." She turned to her son. "If you wish, Jack can take the Lestrange name and become Corvus VII. At his mother's suggestion, Jack straightened, puffing out his round chest and trying to look the part. Corvus VI nodded and, beckoning, said, "Good boy. Come here. Let me look at you." The old man's mottled mouth split into a grin as he reached and took Jack's hand. It felt like sandpaper. Jack swallowed the sting and tried not to flinch. For the sake of that fortune, he dared not refuse. "Good, good," Corvus said, nodding approvingly. His smile carried something else, some private amusement that set Belle's eyes alight. She allowed herself a pleased smile in return. "My daughter Fleur also has family blood," Barbara began, but Belle cut her off with an air of a manor mistress. She stepped closer to Fleur, lifted the girl's chin and appraised her coldly. "Quite beautiful. Fit, certainly, 1/4 Vila blood." There was a sneer in her voice that implied Fleur was somehow less worthy. Barbara bristled and stood abruptly. For a moment it seemed the two women would come to blows. Corvus VI raised a hand. "Many of you have come today. Belle, Barbara, Jack, Emma. You all have Lestrange blood and are therefore eligible." He waved again, and a maid brought forward 6 small boxes. Each was exquisite, carved with delicate grapevine motifs. The golden clasps on their fronts gleamed and shimmered with protective enchantments. Each would only open for a specific key. "I've divided the inheritance into 6 parts," Corvus said, patting the boxes. "Each part is locked in one box. Bring me the key, and you inherit what's inside." His gaze lingered on Jock, as if trying to imprint the boy's face in his memory. Jock felt watched, like a fawn under a predator's eye. A cold dread crept through him until he could only bow his head. "Where are the keys?" Belle demanded. "The catacombs." A ripple of startled murmurs swept the room. The catacombs. That place had a reputation. Rogge leaned closer and whispered, "What did he say?" "The keys are hidden in the Paris catacombs," the old man repeated. "Beneath the city." "The catacombs that hold millions of bones?" someone breathed. "Some say there's a gateway to hell down there," Fleur murmured, shrinking. "Wizards have even claimed to see the Grim Reaper." The history of the catacombs was grim and indisputable. Centuries ago, the plague had left so many dead that Parisian cemeteries collapsed. Bones were exhumed and moved into abandoned quarries beyond the city. Those tunnels stretched for hundreds of kilometers and held the remains of 6 to 7 million muggles, jumbled together in nameless stacks. Priests had sorted and arranged as best they could, but the place was a necromancer's dream. If necromancy existed, this would be its test ground. With the city's expansion, the catacombs had become part of Paris' underbelly. A collapse could swallow whole neighborhoods. Don't worry, Corvus said with a smile that did not reach his eyes. He set more than a dozen black and yellow candles on the table. These are made from corpse oil from those years. Light them, and they will guide you when you approach the keys. He flicked his wand, and the candles rose and hovered, one after another, before the family. Corvus leaned on his cane as if intending to retire. There are many of you, but only 6 keys. Hurry. Then, without warning, his legs buckled. He fell forward, the cane thudding against the table. A dull, final sound filled the hall. Corvus fixed, slumped to the floor, a curious smile frozen on his face. He was dead. Several of the women screamed, "Uncle! Uncle!" Relatives surged forward to wounds unavoidable. Corvus VI had died suddenly, unexpectedly. The cries were brief. Surprise and a certain relief replaced mourning. He had explained the terms of his estate before he died. The boxes. Someone's hand drifted toward them, greed plain in their eyes. The maid at the table steadied herself, and voice cool, reminded them, "Master said only those who obtain the keys may inherit. The boxes remain here until then." "Jock, let's go to the catacombs," Belle said, pulling a sheet of wax that had sealed the corpse and slipping it into her pocket. She didn't linger. One by one, the others rose and vanished. There were only 6 keys. Whoever reached them first would take the lion's share. The maid stayed behind to guard Corvus's body while the family dispersed into the night. Rogge hesitated with the corpse wax between his fingers. "Mom," he said quietly to Jessica, "maybe we should forget this. Something's not right." Everything about the evening had felt wrong. The old man's longevity, the corpse wax, catacombs, death, and inheritance all strung together like a dark charm. He couldn't shake the feeling that Corvus's survival had been the work of foul magic. Jessica nodded, uneasy, but she had already promised Barbara and could not back out now. "We go to District 14, Place Denford Rochereau," Barbara instructed. "From there we enter the catacombs." She found a seemingly ordinary manhole cover, tapped it in a particular rhythm, and the entrance opened. She lit a candle of the corpse wax. It rose and floated ahead, a grim will-o-wisp leading them into the tunnels. The light revealed layer upon layer of bones stacked along the passage, skulls rearranged by long-ago hands into crosses, hearts, and other bizarre patterns. Others lay scattered at their feet, cracked and careless, and the echo of their footsteps carried far in the deep corridors, bouncing off stone and bone. "There are many secret passages," Barbara said, forcing a laugh. "Sometimes, secret gatherings." Fleur trailed close to her mother. Jessica and her son kept their distance. Rogge's night vision picked out every detail, the chalky gleam of femurs, the faded grime of centuries, strange symbols scrawled on damp walls. The floating candle drifted, suddenly angling into a narrow side passage. "To the left," Barbara said, alert and hungry for any advantage. Rogge felt a prickling down his spine. He snapped his head around and saw, just beyond the corner, a dark robe drifting past, not worn by a person, but moving as if pushed by an unseen current. "What's wrong?" Jessica asked, following the direction Rogge had turned, but all she could see was blackness stretching into the tomb. "There's something there," Rogge said, waving his wand as a warning. "Close your eyes." He cast Lumos. A bright light burst from the tip of his wand and pushed the darkness back. In the narrow passage, the glow revealed everything at once. Rogge held his wand in his left hand and a sword in his right as he moved quickly toward the corner he'd glimpsed. The light showed ancient walls scrawled with strange writing and a charcoal pattern drawn across the stone. In the center of the design, a tall, dark shadow rose almost to the ceiling. "Do you see anything?" Barbara squinted. The glare forced her to blink and close her eyes. She inwardly cursed her luck. The small candle she had carried must be gone, she thought, and hoped no one else had taken the key. Rogge frowned and let the spell die. Darkness rushed back in, swallowing the 4 of them. He stared into the passage, puzzling. Did I imagine it? No, I couldn't have. "Expecto Patronum," he shouted. A silver crow burst from his wand, circled the passage once, then settled on his shoulder. "Did you find anything?" Jessica asked, worry in her voice. "There was a shadow drifting through here a moment ago, but it's not here now." Rogge turned and realized Barbara and Fleur were gone. Where are they? Could they have gone after the candle? The mother and son exchanged a look that chilled their bones. 2 living people hadn't simply walked away without a word. Barbara's bluntness alone made that unlikely. Their sudden disappearance meant something unnatural had happened. "If I remember right, the candle drifted down the left passage," Jessica said, drawing out her share of corpse wax and lighting it with a small charm. A faint, rotten smell rose from the flame. Rogge held his breath. The odor hit him late, and when it did, it made his stomach lurch. "Mom, wait!" He stepped back 2 paces and the smell faded. "This candle is wrong. It stinks." "Why didn't I smell it first?" Jessica asked. "I learned a lot from Snape," Rogge said slowly. "After long exposure, you can tell scents apart. That odor had corpse flower powder and rosemary." His face tightened. "Corvus Vsix lied. This wax is made with corpse oil from that year. Corpse flower powder and rosemary are strong and hallucinogenic. Legitimate potions don't use them. They're used in the dark arts to twist the mind." "This is a trap," Jessica said. "Then Barbara and Fleur are in danger," Rogge answered. He watched the dark too closely to pretend otherwise. He tested apparition, and feeling reassured that he could still need it, forced himself to breathe more calmly. "Breathe with the bubblehead charm," he added, thinking of a way to block the fumes. "If the candle led them somewhere, following it will take us to them." Jessica relit the corpse wax. Protected by shimmering air bubbles, they followed the candle down the twisting, increasingly cold passage. The tombs usually held a steady chill of about 14 degrees, but as they went deeper, the temperature dropped. Moisture on the stone froze in delicate petals of ice that clung to the walls. "Movement," Jessica hissed. She blew out the candle, crouched low, and pulled Rogge behind her. Ahead, an ancient stone door was set into the passageway. A greenish-purple light flickered from within, stretching shadows into thin, jittering figures that danced on the walls like ghosts. "Jessica?" A voice, Corvus Vsix, slid through the darkness, amused and hollow. "Uninvited guests always cause trouble, don't they?" He sighed, a grim mockery in the sound. "You're supposed to be dead." Jessica dropped her pretense of hiding. She raised her wand, shielding Rogge behind her, and edged forward toward the stone door. Inside the chamber, a huge cauldron swung over a ravenous fire, its flames throwing a sickly green and purple glow. Thigh bones served as fuel, creaking as they fed the blaze. From the weird fire, ghostly wisps drifted up, mingling with dozens of small corpse candles that floated and bobbed in the air. What was in the cauldron made both of them recoil. Heads, bells and jocks, bobbed in a raging, blood-dark broth. Their eyes were wide open. Rictus smiles fixed their pale faces in a horror that did not belong to the living. The heads rose and fell in the churning liquid, as if breathing, as if the pot demanded their faces. Other banquet guests stood spaced around the room, like sheep waiting to be slaughtered. Barbara and Fleur were among them, limp and vacant-eyed. The sight froze Jessica and Rogge where they stood. A pressure pressed on their chests and their breaths came short. Everything in the chamber was wrong. Everything smelled of rot and iron. "What is this?" Jessica managed. Her eyes never left the cauldron. Corvus Vsix's voice had a thin, delighted edge. "A reversal spell," he said. "Dark arts, born of old rites. It turns death back toward youth. It will give me a new body." Jessica moved before he could finish. 2 spells leapt from her wand like sharp, cold beams. The old man laughed, amused. The light struck the air in front of him with a dull, protesting hum, as if it had hit an unbreakable barrier. Only then did they understand. They were not in the same room. An invisible ward separated them. Corvus's face split into a grin. He gestured, and 2 headless bodies were hung up on the wall like trophies, a show of past rites. Dark stains and empty necks told of repetition. The old witch, Corvus's assistant, grinned at Jessica and busied herself with the ritual. Corvus sat on a low stone stool behind the cauldron, so withered he seemed incapable of moving. He smiled without warmth and fixed his rheumy eyes first on Jessica, then on his assistant. "The heart of the bloodline," he said softly. The maid nodded and, with a whisper of a spell, stripped the flesh from the headless corpses. 2 intact hearts were lifted out and tossed into the boiling cauldron. The liquid surged and began to boil harder. Dark bubbles broke the surface, and from them came thin, keening sounds, not quite human, that scraped at the nerves and seemed to call for something beyond the tomb. "Their flesh," Corvus commanded next. The maid heaved the deboned torsos into the pot. Corvus watched the surface and nodded with satisfaction. She opened a small box filled with yellowed thigh bones. As they clacked into the cauldron, the liquid surface roiled, and the bubbling formed odd, twitching patterns. The blood-red broth congealed into a shifting image, an obscene mirage. The bubbles coalesced into shapes that shimmered with an eerie light. The ghost fire on the walls began to flare and stutter, green and purple flames casting monstrous shadows that crawled and closed in. In the heart of the cauldron, the two hearts and the scraps of tissue seemed to fuse into something living, a mass that writhed and moaned from within the blood-dark soup. The air thickened with an oppressive, nauseating evil. "Good, good, good," Corvus whispered, trembling with excitement. He gestured at the maid. She hauled him up and, with practiced cruelty, helped him fold his shriveled frame into a cross-legged position and pitched him into the boiling liquid. He sank like wax into heat, his old skin collapsing and dissolving. The old witch began to chant, a harsh string of ancient Greek syllables that crawled up from her throat. Her voice was a dry rasp as the cauldron boiled, and the chamber swelled with a sound like 1,000 distant wails. Strange, discordant spells, like ancient incantations plucked from the abyss, were poured into the cauldron of death. Red mist curled up from its brim and braided itself through the air. The hot liquid within thickened into a black and red paste that gave off a sickly, fishy stench. Even with the clear stone wall between them and the bubblehead charm sealing the chamber, Rogge and Jessica caught the odor. It was invisible and colorless, an attack on the soul. Anyone who perceived it could not escape its influence. From the gurgling skin of the cauldron surfaced a low, rasping prayer. I, Corvus VI Lestrange, with bones for a boat and soul for sail, I crossed the river Styx to be reborn through sin. As the words fell, a human skeleton began to coalesce in the paste. With flesh and blood as ink and bone as paper, the chant continued. Blood vessels threaded themselves over the skeleton. The paste sloughed away into clarity, and a smooth male form emerged. Darkness pooled around him, and a cold wind rose from the earth. Jessica felt a chill of dread. If the ritual completed, Corvus would surely kill them to guard his secret. She furiously cast spell after spell at the obstruction in front of her, but nothing penetrated the invisible barrier. "Get out of here, now!" she whispered, glancing helplessly at the unmoving forms of Barbara and Fleur. "No, this is old Kevis trying to scare us," Rogge said, shaking his head. "If this succeeds, it's at his weakest moment." He had already pieced together Corvus VI's monstrous plan and the logic of the bloody rite. Corvus had spread word of his impending death to lure his descendants back to Lestrange Manor with promises of inheritance. Using the key he'd hidden, he drew them into the catacombs and staged a death so convincing that the lit corpse candles guided everyone straight into the prepared chamber. Then, using the maid as a conduit, he would perform a dark arts ritual for himself. The cauldron would be his mother, the blood of his descendants his medium. The flesh and blood of Belle and her son and the bones of his ancestors were raw materials for Corvus's new body. From start to finish, his aim was naked and terrible. He believed a decaying body doomed a wizard to death. So to cheat death, the soul had to be housed in a young, vigorous body. Rogge knew that if they fled now, the consequences would be ruinous. The catacombs were a maze. A wizard could apparat away, but without the corpse candle's guidance, finding this place again was like finding a needle in a haystack, and Barbara and Fleur were trapped in whoever's chamber Corvus had prepared. "We can't get through that thing," Jessica said, stepping forward and battering the transparent stone with clenched fists. It had been reinforced by Corvus. Nothing she did dented it. Her blows thudded against the wall, each impact ringing long down the passage. On the third thump, the old witch beside the cauldron raised her head and sneered, as if to mock their frustration. "How did Barbara and Fleur get in?" she asked aloud. "Maybe Corvus sealed the passage after they went in? But how would old Kivas know who came first? Is it possible they aren't behind the wall at all?" They volleyed theories, each answer more uncertain than the last. Then the corpse in the cauldron stirred. Hair sprouted on its bald head, its thin arms pressed at the rim as it tried to rise. Everything below the chest, however, remained a murky paste that needed time to form. The old witch soothed him. "My lord, you must wait a little longer, or your body might deform." Corvus stared at her with wide, feverish eyes. Waiting was his only option, yet unease threaded through him. Jessica and Rogge's whispered speculation was heading toward the truth. Rogge's eyes went bright. He ran through possibilities in an instant, a cold, efficient mental simulation. You melt the wall with a fireball technique, but gain nothing. Corvus Sixt vanishes without a trace, and Lestrange Manor goes up in flames. Years later, you find Barbara and Fleur's remains in the catacombs. Not on the other side. Rogge's voice cut softly. Is this a magical projection? He replayed every detail and found the anomaly. There had been a lag between their knocks and the old witch's reaction, a delay between their questions and old Kevis's replies. In short, Corvus had prepared a pair of projection walls. Both sides were speaking to a likeness. They might be miles apart. From the start, this had been the wrong place. What a cunning old fox, Rogge muttered, eyes sweeping the dark. They're not behind this wall. It's a projection. Then where are they? Jessica frowned. Without knowing Corvus's exact location, how could they track him? Rogge's next question startled her. Is the French Ministry of Magic strong? Jessica's expression sharpened. She didn't think he intended to call for help, otherwise he wouldn't have asked. Such a question hinted at something else. His next actions would draw the ministry's notice. What are you planning? She asked. Save them, Rogge said firmly. We may have to run to France afterward. He didn't hesitate. Under his mother's startled gaze, he unleashed fiend fire. The cursed flame, fed on the bones littering the tombs, erupted with a terrifying intelligence. It twisted into the shape of a giant fiery raven, roaring like a primeval beast as it opened a maw that incinerated everything nearby. Scorchlight spilled through the passage, lapping at every surface and banishing the chill. Rogge glanced at his panel. After a year of practice, his fiendfire had reached level 5. Even if old Kevis's secret chamber wasn't immediately present here, it was still in the catacombs, and the fiendfire, wielded with care, would force the maze to give up its secrets. Rend, he cried, and the single raven fractured into a flock of sleek, flaming birds. They darted through the passages, plummeting into bone-choked niches and devouring the skeletal fuel that cramped their way. The heat climbed exponentially. Passages above swelled with warmth. Manholes in District 14 shook, and snakes, insects, and rodents poured from their nests, fleeing into the city above. Jessica's face went white. The bones that carpeted the catacombs were the perfect tinder for fiendfire. If Rogge lost control, the flames could become unstoppable, obliterating the Muggle city overhead. But he drove the blaze forward with the focus of someone who had practiced every danger into a weapon. Found it, Rogge shouted, as the fiery ravens traced a hidden corridor, and the hot wind brought with it the faint, unmistakable scent of living blood. One of the countless fiendfire birds plunged headlong into the bone wall. A chorus of skulls flared and disintegrated into ash, tumbling aside to reveal the chamber of secrets beyond. The old witch screamed, pointing her wand at the fiendfire that had swept into the chamber. She unleashed aguamenti, raised barriers, even hurled fiendfire back at the flaming birds, but nothing could stop them. A fiendfire bird slammed into old Kevis, devouring his blaze and bleaching the bluish-purple flames to a silvery white. The pitch-black cauldron at his side liquefied, and the contents steamed away into thin, whitening smoke. Corvus shrieked and writhed on the floor. His condensing form stiffened, the lower half of his body blurred and then ballooned into a bloated, ugly mass of flesh. The fiendfire gnawed at him. His once smooth skin was burned beyond recognition. Corvus Sixt howled in agony, gasping, "Petrificus totalis! Quick! Use Petrificus totalis on me!" The old witch obeyed at once, sweeping her wand. By some strange countercurse, she froze the fiendfire around him with Petrificus totalis, snuffing the worst of the flames. Such destructive, runaway magic was terrifying. Ordinary spells rarely pierced it. Fortunately for Corvus, one of the few who knew this countercurse was at hand. If he hadn't, he would probably have been reduced to ash. Old Kevis snatched a wand from the helpless maid and cast a healing spell on himself. The charred skin drew back, the worst of the burns subsided, and he let out a long, shuddering breath as he looked down at the misshapen mass beneath his navel. He resembled a grotesque roly-poly doll. "Master!" the maid cried, frozen with fright. "There's no time! Go!" Corvus barked. Voices and footsteps echoed. Jessica and Rogge were close. He tried to apparate. Petrificus totalis! Rogge strode into the Chamber of Secrets, and his curse struck true. Old Kevis's eyes flared blood red. He fixed Rogge with a hatred so raw it made the hair on the back of every neck rise, then locked on Jessica. He sagged, and a torrent of curses tore from his throat, animal sounds of rage and pain. "You traitor brat! Fool! Did you think you could stop me? You ruined everything. Ruined my body. I'll make you regret ever setting foot here." His voice ripped through the chamber. His gaze was mad and feral. Old Kevis looked again at his mutilated form. Rogge and Jessica already had their wands trained on him. He knew the game was lost. Madness and a murderous kind of hope lit his eyes. "Bone fusion!" he howled, wrenching the spell from his throat with savage force. A darkness unlike any ordinary curse poured from him, an ugly raven-black magic that found the scattered bones across the floor and stained them with its light. Finger bones, femurs, spines, like a spreading contagion, they began to glow and crawl together. Bones meshed under the pull of the spell, locking and twisting in grotesque, unnatural ways. Ribs and vertebrae crossed back onto themselves into jagged spikes. Pelvic bones locked into deformed hollows. Shoulder blades and scapulae wove into the lower torso of a headless monstrosity. Fingers and toes fused into short, curved claws, each joint bordered with razor edges. The thing was a mockery of life, half-assembled, absurdly heavy, and malign. Corvus Six's incantation continued to reach out. Bones across the tomb tumbled toward the forming creature like iron filings to a magnet. Layer after layer collected on its carcass until it wore a massive, armored carapace of bone. Where a skull should have been, the creature's headless neck was heaped with outer skulls. If Rogge's earlier fiendfire hadn't already incinerated so many of the surrounding skeletons, the beast would have been far more fearsome. "It will kill you! Kill you all!" Corvus shrieked, a lunatic swallowed by darkness. The bone fusion monstrosity turned toward Jessica and Rogge. It had no eyes, but the empty place where a face should have been radiated a cold, deathly attention, a hungry, pitiless focus. A desolate, vertiginous scent spread through the Chamber of Secrets, a smell like the edge of an abyss, the sensation of falling from untold heights. It crawled into the sinuses, made muscles clamp, and sent a chill down the spine. The fused creature reared and brought its jagged claws down in a heavy blow that split the air with a shriek. "Watch out!" Jessica cried as she shielded her son and launched a beam from her wand. Her spell slammed into the bone beast, shattering and scattering bones where it struck and driving a hole clean through one flank. But that only cleared half of the creature. Its other half surged forward, undeterred, talons whistling in a deadly arc. Rogge yanked Jessica back and met the assault with the sword of Gryffindor. He swung and parried. The blade flashed like lightning as it deflected repeated strikes. He cleaved into ribs again and again, sending bone fragments skittering away, but each blow stuck fast into layers of fused bone. The sword became lodged several times. It grated like metal on bone that had been welded together. The old witch tried a sneaky counterattack, but Jessica was quick. She blocked the killing curse aimed at her. Corvus watched them with a savage smile, eyes glittering with malice. "Heh, it's finally time for my revenge," he sneered, venom in every word. "This is ancient magic, tempered with death. Your spells will not touch it." He laughed, cruel and triumphant. "I will rip your heads from your shoulders and tear your hearts from your chests. You will atone with your flesh and blood. I will remake myself from you." Corvus's arrogance swelled, as if the victory was already his. The bones burned by fiendfire were only a drop in the vast reserves beneath the tomb. Rogge had put out the fiendfire when he first found the chamber to avoid collapse, but that allowed a constant stream of contaminated bone to be drawn in, an inexhaustible supply. The bone fusion monster only grew. As it bulked up, it changed tactics. Its swings lost speed, but its body sprouted bone spikes. Rogge split open part of its foreclaw, and the creature reacted by projecting long, needle-like spikes that lunged straight for his heart. He barely twisted aside. The force of the strike punched a wide, ragged hole in the wall behind him. "Ancient magic?" Rogge said shortly. He sheathed the sword and lowered his wand. Then, with his right hand raised, a crackling fireball bloomed into being in his palm. "Heh, just a fireball technique. And you think that can beat my dark arts?" Corvus sneered at the little flame. He didn't understand what it truly was. A fireball technique isn't mere fire. It is a finely woven structure, the outward expression of a wizard's deep understanding of elemental magic. Unlike a dragon's breath or hellfire, which are raw projectile flames, a true fireball is made by condensing free fire elements and locking them into a precise, stable form, a perfect sphere composed only of pure fire. If any physical matter were involved, it wouldn't be a fireball technique at all. It would be a meteorite, a rock fall, a different spell entirely. In Rogue's previous life, they called it rubbing a fireball. At first, the orb is tiny, but as a wizard's grasp of the element deepens and the structure is refined, the ball grows, and one day it can become an inferno. "Go!" Rogue swung his arm. The fireball streaked straight at the bone-melting monster. Small and grotesque as it was, it struck with brutal force against the creature's armored bones. The explosion's shockwave tore through the chamber, shattering the hulking thing into a scatter of fragments. Corvus shrieked in disbelief. What is this? This can't be." He flung himself back, snatching up the broken bones and hurling them together while chanting furious spells, trying to reassemble the thing. The scattered pieces trembled and began to knit. Bones from other passages rolled in of their own accord. A new bone-melting monster was taking shape. "Heh! Persistent," Rogue said, a little rueful. "There's no monster a fireball can't finish. If one won't do it, 5 will." Only Rogue here truly knew the fireball technique. He wasn't going to let Corvus see the full power of the fireball sect. Bang! 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 A string of detonations shook the chamber as Rogue sent fireball after fireball into the reassembling creature. Each blast broke it apart. The flames consumed the fragments. The bone supply in the stone passages dwindled. Even as bones tried to stream in from other corridors, what returned to the monster was ever smaller, more ragged. Heavy obstruction. Rogue cast a spell behind him without looking. Bones surging from adjacent tomb passages slammed into an invisible barrier and collapsed in layered heaps, sealing off that section completely. On the other side of the chamber, Jessica had the old witch on the ropes. Beams of light clashed between their wands, the air tearing with raw magical pressure. The old crone's face was a mask of strain as she fought desperately. A huge impact echoed through stone as one of Jessica's spells struck the witch squarely in the chest. The witch screamed and crashed against the wall. "Avada Kedavra!" Jessica cried. The lethal green jet pierced the old witch. She slumped, breath gone, dead as a small animal in a corner. Relief washed over Jessica, and she turned toward Corvus to finish him, but the breath in the air curdled. An acrid, smoky scent slid into their nostrils, like someone stuffing charred wood under their noses. The candle flame dropped to the size of a grain of rice. Darkness pressed in from all sides, dense and immediate. "It's hell! It's hell!" Corvus cowered then, caught in a fever of triumph. "There must be a gate to hell here. There must be." Darkness pooled on the wall and stretched into a long, gaunt silhouette, rising from floor to ceiling like a charcoal stroke. A presence hovered there, impossible to see directly, but undeniable. Even the faintest light seemed to cast that shadow. The atmosphere went suffocatingly still. Silence wrapped around them like a hand on the throat. They watched, breath caught, as the shadow raised a scythe. The blade did not strike the living. It swung down on the dead body of the old witch and with cold precision sliced away what the watchers could only think of in one small, horrible measurement, 21 grams. The small, exact weight that old superstition gave to the soul. "The death they told stories about?" Rogue murmured, uneasy. The silhouette carried an authority that made wizards feel like lambs before a hunter. Life and death yawned as different worlds. The shadow began to fade, but before it could vanish, Rogue moved. Sectum Sempra. A silver arc of magic flashed. It pierced Corvus across the brow, leaving a sharp red line. The crow-like old man gave a single thin sound and collapsed. He died there in the catacombs, quietly, as if the stone itself closed over him. The hooded figure reformed in the chill that followed. Frost traced the air as the temperature fell. The presence coalesced into a tall shape with a scythe, its voice a low, cavernous sound. A dark soul, full of blood and sin. It swung the scythe again in a smooth, practiced arc. From Corvus's still form, a small, reluctant wisp of something drifted out, The thing Death lifted and turned over, examining like a curious knick-knack. It then retrieved the old witch's soul and turned, addressing the two survivors. A suitable offering. You may accept your reward. I, Death, can grant any wish. Sir? Jessica's voice trembled. She stared at the hooded figure, disbelief and awe mingling. Are you Death? Rogge gave a short nod and pushed with his eyes for her to speak. The figure inclined its head as if amused. Legends? It repeated in a voice like distant wind. All legends begin with truth. Which do you mean? The tale of the three brothers, Rogge said. How they crossed a river and tricked Death. The hood nodded. Ah, Death's tone held something almost like pity. The three who triumphed, who cheated an end, they were given gifts. It peered into Rogge's face from beneath the hood. The dark inside was a still, deep place. You are the owner of that wand. There, but it wasn't that wand. The voice came from the hood, no face visible, yet the gaze felt like a thing that could pin objects to the spot. It was fixed on the Chillin-marked wand in Rogge's hand. The figure turned its head slightly toward the Scottish Highlands and said, almost absently, "Very interesting." Jessica had expected Death to be monstrous. She hadn't expected him to talk. She swallowed and asked carefully, "Which wand?" "A wand I made with my own hands." The hood's voice was soft but certain. "Elder, 15 inches, able to master Death." Rogge muttered under his breath, bitter and a little awed. It really does master Death. Whoever owns it never ends well. There was something about the word elder, the origin of the Elder Wand, that carried its own weight. The Elder Wand had vanished and reappeared more times than anyone could count. A thing without conscience, it belonged to whoever had won it. If it could speak, it would probably say, "I only want the quiet life of a county magistrate's wife. Who the magistrate is, I could not care less." Pride and worry warred across Jessica's face. "Son, how did you become the wand's master?" Rogge shook his head, putting on a careless shrug. "I don't know either." The boy's eyes met hers as if to reassure. The hood inclined once, enigmatically. "It finds you," Death said. Then darker, "Have you considered your reward?" His voice carried a temptation that dusted the air like cobwebs. Jessica's hand tightened involuntarily around Rogge's. He caught the gesture and shook his head at her. "Can I trade it for 2 questions?" he asked the hood, cautious. "Oh?" The hood sounded amused that anyone would bargain. "Very well. Can you attack wizards?" "No," Death shook his head. "Not directly, but accidents can." The smile that followed was too knowing. Many witches and wizards who accepted boons from Death found their ends in a chain of conveniently timed accidents. Rogge drew a slow breath. He did not believe Death would be merciful in the way humans understand mercy. There were rules here, and Death obeyed them. Jessica nodded encouragement. "One more. Why can some wizards escape death?" "Magic." The answer was blunt and final. Without another word, the hooded figure dissolved into shadow and was gone. "Magic?" Rogge echoed, puzzled. Before he could dwell on it, the tomb passage around them began to speak in a different language, a hard, staccato chorus of cracking stone. The catacombs had first been scorched by fiend fire and then chilled by the cold touch of death. Under the assault of both fire and ice, the masonry was failing. Tiny fissures lengthened into seams, seams into gaping splits. The whole underground web could not take the strain from above. Stones began to rain down. Dust choked the air. Farther away, the city itself responded with low booms and tremors. Pavements cracked, and buildings shuddered. Jessica snatched the protective spell away and called out hoarsely, "Barbara! Fleur!" Both women stirred, but had lost too much blood. They collapsed back into unconsciousness as they came to. The ceiling let go of chunks and rubble. The distant sound of something collapsing grew and grew. Rogge's face hardened. The signs were ugly. They had to get out now. "We have to go," Jessica said, voice taut. Her apparition was limited. She couldn't take 3 people at once. She could barely manage one. The golden feather portkey at Rogge's belt still thrummed with residual magic, but the destination was too far for it to help. If this keeps up, she let the thought hang, the French aurors will be on us. The catacomb collapse had been triggered by Corvus VI's ritual. Corvus was dead, but the French magical senate would not care about that nuance. They would want a culprit. Looking at the widening cracks and the steady, awful sound of masonry breaking, Jessica made a quick decision. "Rogge, clear a path with Bombarda." As soon as we're out, we apparat away from France. All right, Rogue steadied himself. Apparition scared him. One misstep could lead to terrible things, so he chose a more controlled option. He pointed his wand at the ceiling and spoke. A pure, bright blue light lanced from the tip, a concentrated ray that punched upward like a blade. The spell hit stone and mortar with an unnerving crystalline sound. The ceiling trembled and then gave. Dust and falling debris answered the blast. Jagged cracks spidered across the walls. Bombarda was relentless, carving a widening shaft that connected the ruined catacombs to whatever lay above. Soil and rock were siphoned away by the spell's force until a usable opening opened to the night. A faint residual enchantment smoothed the air through the opening, making the climb less perilous. Jessica and the remaining survivors followed, shoulders hunched against grit, coughing and blinking into the thin outside air. Behind them, the passage they had just left hissed and tore itself apart, dust billowing like a second storm. Rumbles rolled through the bones of the earth. Above ground in District 14, the situation was unraveling quickly. Buildings listed and sank, roads split apart, people spilled into the streets, shrieking and running for safety. Wizards in Paris answered the emergency with grim speed. "Director, District 14 is collapsing," Louis reported breathlessly to Pierre. Pierre spat angrily on the cobbles. "This city's underground is ancient and hollow in places." He barked a spell. "Obscuro!" A white smoke burst from his wand tip and broadened into a thick fog that poured over the neighborhood. Wizards moved through it, working discreetly to shore up foundations and keep houses from toppling. "I hope the muggles don't see this," Pierre muttered, his wand flashing over a sagging lintel. Brooms darted like gray birds as teams of witches and wizards patched foundations with reparo and reinforced beams with more complex charms. It helped the surface, but could not undo whatever cracking cavern lay beneath. "We have to find the source of the collapse," Pierre ordered, jaw set. "Louis, take teams and search the streets. The rest of you with me." "We're out." Rogue gulped the night air and let it fill his lungs. For the first time in a long stretch of time, the fog of the underground, dust, fear, the voice of the hooded figure, seemed to lift a little. He could almost breathe. Jessica, panting, dumped her unconscious relatives onto the floor. They had to disappear completely, and fast. French aurors could swoop down at any moment. "Shh, someone's coming," she whispered. In one motion, she and Roger cast a disillusionment charm, cloaking them all in shadow. Brooms burst through the clouds above, aurors cutting through the mist, broom tails carved vortices in the sky. For a moment, the riders flew on, then those who had been leaving turned back, as if something had pricked at their instincts. Jessica's heart thudded. She raised her wand, fingers poised. "Over here," one of the aurors shouted from above. Jessica's wrist flicked. She was ready to fire a killing curse, but Roger yanked her arm back. "Mom, wait," he hissed, and the spell was never sent. The auror overhead hadn't realized how close he'd come to death. He lowered his broom and peered into a yawning, collapsing pit. This hole should be the center of the collapse. He called to his companions, then raised his wand. A beam of probing light shot down into the sinkhole. Roger, hidden in the shadows, shook his head. He knew instinctively that this pit was not the true core. Paris was riddled with vaults and caverns. The proud, massive sewers the Muggles boasted about were nothing but ticking time bombs. District 14 would be the first domino. Without quick wizarding intervention, the whole city could fall apart. Jessica felt someone coming in hard and fast and patted her son's shoulder. "We have to go." She cast a short, confounding charm and wiped away the traces they'd left. Below them, Pierre and Louis landed and dismounted, studying the sagging earth with grim faces. Louis crouched and examined the crater. "There's magic here. A wizard did this." This was deliberate. Someone used magic to wreck the catacombs and bring the city down. "This is an attack on Paris," Pierre said, voice cold with anger. "Notify the Senate. Lock the city down." "Not just Paris," Louis answered, looking around as if the order might already be late. "All of France." Jessica hurried her relatives away from the scene and back to Barbara's manor. The sounds of collapse dogged them, groans of shifting earth, the distant, angry shudder of buildings, and she felt a cold knot of dread. "We can't stay here," she told Roger. If the Confederation launches an investigation, vanishing now will only make us suspects, Roger said quietly. The more dangerous the situation, the harder it was to leave without drawing attention. He looked up at the thickening clouds and then suddenly had an idea. Lestrange Manor. Why there? Jessica asked. To make the truth, Roger said. He meant fabricate one, control the narrative before the Ministry could. Lestrange Manor crouched in the mist like a sleeping beast. Fog wound through its trees and warped that colored light slanted through slightly twisted stained glass windows. Inside, footsteps echoed as Roger and Jessica returned to the ballroom to begin setting their plan in motion. I need more details, Roger told Jessica. No plan survived contact with reality without precise facts. Wake Barbara. Tell me everything about the manor. Jessica nodded and touched Barbara with a quick reparo of health. A green glow floated up, and Barbara's pale face flushed back to life. She woke clutching her wand, disoriented. Where am I? She asked, scanning the dim, unfamiliar banquet hall. When she saw them, relief washed over her. Jessica, Roger, Fleur, what happened to her? Don't worry. She's lost a lot of blood, but she'll live, Roger said, smoothing the panic from his voice as he and Jessica filled her in, carefully. They told her the essentials and lied around the edges. Corvus used dark arts to fashion a new body, Jessica said, softening the how. The catacombs collapsed. Roger and I rescued you. Barbara bristled, then sank back into the chair. The manor trembled with another distant groan. They'll be looking for Corvus V'Six, she said. It's his work. What if the Department of Magical Law Enforcement decides we're responsible? Jessica asked. Barbara's face went white. Then what will we do? Her panic was sharp and honest. Roger kept his tone level. The ministry in France, he knew, could be as relentless as any other. No mercy for those who looked guilty. We'll make it look like we never went to the catacombs, he said. We'll wipe the memory. You mean obliviate? Barbara's voice was small. Yes. Roger's plan unfolded into precise questions. Had there been house elves in the manor? No, Barbara answered. They were taken by the old crow, Corvus, for experiments. He asked whether Corvus had set a time for the banquet, whether anyone had left early. Every answer filled another gap. Barbara exhaled and let herself be guided to a chair. Do whatever you must, she said. Just make it stop. Roger avoided using his wand openly. Wandless magic looked less suspicious. He murmured the charms and let the gentle, numbing strokes of stupefy and obliviate do their work. Slivers of memory, silver and fragile, unfurled from Barbara's temples and dissipated like smoke into the room. Roger and Jessica went through the motions of arranging the scene, placing people where they should have been, making sure the manor looked as if nothing unusual had happened after the banquet. Everyone, save Corvus V'Six, his maid, Belle, and her son, was returned to their original seats. Should I do it too? Jessica asked, looking at Roger. For completeness, he said. He cast the stun and sent Jessica reeling until she collapsed, face down on the table. Roger hesitated for a half-beat, then took measures to make sure he wouldn't lose necessary information. He wrote the knight's crucial facts in Chinese on the inside of his coat, private, indelible, and with a dab of magic, scrawled a line of water on the tabletop. Hesitation leads to defeat. You stupefy on yourself. Only someone who read Chinese would ever understand why that instruction was there. Then he closed his eyes. He pressed his fingers to his temple and began to pull out the memories that came after the banquet, the dangerous ones. They rose like smoke and vanished. When he finished, Roger stared at the room for a moment, stunned, before springing up. Mom! He checked Jessica first, relieved to find her simply unconscious and otherwise unharmed. Then his attention went to the body of the room. Corvus V'Six and the maid were not there. Belle and her boy were gone. He searched, opening doors and peering through dim corridors, heart pacing. On the table, the water writing caught the light, and he bent over it. It was in Chinese, only he would have written like that here. What had forced him to stun himself? Had he erased everyone's memory of the same events he had just wiped? Had his own stupefy been used on others? The questions clustered and throbbed, but before he could puzzle further, a white light blazed from the clouds above. The ground's shuddering slowed and then stopped. The city, while battered, ceased sinking. Even as the light steadied the earth, the damage remained plain. Crooked buildings, deep, jagged cracks down facades, gaping holes in the roads. The night had left its mark. The city had been spared immediate ruin, but the scars said the rest of the story. A wave of unease ran through Rogge. He wiped at the water stains on the table and sat back into his chair. "Stupefy!" he cried, but his hand slipped. The red bolt struck his own face. Instantly, a dizzy spell washed over him, and his head thudded heavily onto the desk. A muffled knock echoed through the banquet hall. For a moment, only the pendulum clock marked time, then Lestrange Manor settled back into an unsettling calm. Outside, the clouds over Paris were thinning. Sunlight filtered down. But District 14 looked as if it had been hit by an explosion. Damage fanned out in every direction. The ground had sagged in places, roads crisscrossed with fissures, some streets had completely collapsed, houses leaned at dangerous angles. Muggles, coated in dust, clustered in stunned groups on the sidewalk, staring at the wreckage. "My cat is gone. Have you seen her? Sophie, Sophie," a plump woman called, pacing and scanning the ruins with frantic eyes. "A cat? What's the fuss with a cat when this is my newly bought apartment?" A man snapped, thumping a rescued baguette against a crooked railing. When a few youths tried to take advantage of the chaos, the man waved the baguette and chased them off. "Renaud, aren't you in insurance? I bought coverage. Will you compensate me?" "You will, right?" another voice demanded. "As long as the company chooses not to go bankrupt," Renaud answered flatly. "Bankrupt? Damn vampires. I knew insurance companies were useless." "What good does yelling do? At least you still have a job." "I'm going to be unemployed," Renaud shot back, shoving aside the man who grabbed his sleeve. He looked around at the ruined buildings. Forget insurance companies. If things went bad enough, even the central bank would make itself scarce. When a company folds, the policies it sold are just paper. The big shareholders and institutions get paid first. Ordinary customers get nothing. Premiums and transferred policies were a mess. No firm would want to take them on. "You have recourse," Renaud added after a breath. "I think the government will find a way." The man swore, powerless to change the situation. Whether the Muggle government could help was uncertain. What was certain was that the French wizarding institutions were scrambling. The Auror office, the Department of Mysteries, every department had been mobilized. Not to investigate the cause, but to erase all traces of wizarding involvement. "What is the speaker doing?" Louis muttered as he emerged from the Senate, anger and frustration lining his face. "What can he do?" Pierre loosened his tie, voice cool. "The Muggle president already called it ground subsidence from an earthquake." "But it was clearly caused by magic," Louis said under his breath. Pierre grabbed him by the shoulder and pulled him aside, eyes scanning the ruined streets. "Do you have proof, or are you ready to take responsibility for accusing the speaker?" "I'm just angry," Louis said. "You're still young," Pierre replied. "You'll learn how to handle this." He indicated the battered houses. "Those are Muggle properties. They don't belong to the French Magic Senate. No nuts worth of relation." "But Muggles died." Pierre inhaled on a cigarette and let out a dry laugh. "Tell me, are any of them on the surface at night, running to the catacombs for parties and secret gatherings? Do you think we should risk a witch hunt over their recklessness?" Louis felt his indignation cool like a splash of cold water. He snatched the cigarette from Pierre and took a long drag, his defiance subdued. DeLong apparated in then, breathless with news. "Boss, we found something. Corvus VI held a banquet last night. The guests haven't been heard from since." "That old Lestrange?" Pierre put on his hat. "Let's go to Lestrange Manor." Louis stared in disbelief. DeLong clapped Louis on the shoulder, half mocking. "Kid, learn something." Nicholas Flamel and his wife Perenelle had acted quickly the night before, using earth magic to fill underground cavities and stop the collapse from spreading. Still, the subsided areas were vast and the number of affected Muggles enormous. Officially, this would be a natural disaster, no hint of magic, because if Muggles found out, the consequences could be catastrophic. Pierre knew that, and knew he had to cover their tracks, but he also wanted to find whoever had started it. He had sent DeLong off quietly to investigate. DeLong had delivered an answer quickly enough. Corvus Lestrange 6. They reached Lestrange Manor and met Delacour at the gate. "Delacour?" one of them asked. "Is no one in the manor?" The three of them fanned out and nearly hemmed him in, a triangular formation that kept him from walking away. "No," Delacour snapped, brows drawn. You suspect me? No, the suspect is old Lestrange. Pierre flicked his wand. The iron gate creaked open. DeLong, keep an eye on him. Delacour said nothing more. He followed them inside, each step heavy with dread. He feared what might be waiting in the house. He feared for Barbara and Fleur. Pierre's expression had grown taut. It was too quiet. Search, he ordered. Louis and DeLong moved quickly through the corridors with wands raised. Delacour hung back, trembling, until Louis returned to the foyer with news. They're in the banquet hall, Louis said. They're alive, just hit with stupefy. Delacour exhaled a long breath and hurried in. The banquet hall was a scene of stunned stillness. Wizards and witches lay slumped at the long table, heads bowed over empty plates as if frozen mid-conversation. Pierre's eyes went straight to 3 vacant chairs at the head of the table. 3 are missing, he said softly. 4, Delacour corrected. There's also a maid. Thank you, Pierre replied. He looked at Louis and DeLong. Who else was here? It should be Belle and her son Jacques, DeLong said. And those 2, he pointed to 2 unfamiliar faces. Jessica and Rogge, guests from Britain. Any Lestrange blood among them? Pierre asked. Delacour nodded. He moved to wake them, murmuring the reviving charm, but nothing happened. He tried and tried. The charm slid off like water. Pierre tried himself, testing the same counterspell. It failed too. Reviving should be the right counter to stupefy. There was no reason it shouldn't respond. The spell work on them is very advanced, Pierre said, more to himself than to anyone else. A faint, almost pleased smile touched his mouth. Powerful spellcasting and the mysterious disappearance of their target suggested they were on the right trail. The underground collapse, the strange, unbreakable sleeping charm, old Lestrange was almost certainly involved. Take them all back, he ordered. Delacour bristled. Pierre, the priority is to save people. It is, Pierre replied, and there was warmth in his voice for the first time. Antidotes and restorative potions might wake them sooner. If that fails, the Senate can call on Nicholas Flamel for assistance. Delacour listened helplessly as Pierre argued. All he could do was arrange for the unconscious men to be taken to the hospital. The Paris Saint-Bernard Magical Hospital, France's largest, was the country's equivalent of St. Mungo's, wards for every kind of curse and concussion, specialists for most magical injuries. Normally, it dealt with such cases routinely. Today was different. The treatment rooms were full of baffled healers, and across a row of motionless wizards, every remedy they knew seemed useless. André, thick-glassed and flustered, rubbed his head and challenged Pierre's assessment. Pierre, are you sure they were hit with stupefy? It's definitely that spell. But our treatments should work, André protested. The other healers clustered around, debating, guessing at possibilities. André finally raised his voice. Quiet. He drew his wand, and with a resigned sigh, pulled the nurse beside him onto an empty bed. Celine, sorry to trouble you. Celine shot a flirtatious look at Delacour by the ward door and posed coquettishly on the mattress. André, go on. Stupefy. André's spell struck cleanly. Celine collapsed instantly. Antidote, he muttered, pouring a potion from a vial into a cup and shoving it into her mouth. He snapped his pocket watch shut and began timing. Celine stirred and muttered as she slowly returned to consciousness. André closed the watch and faced Pierre. See? The antidote works. I'm sorry, there's nothing more we can do. If stupefy was indeed the cause, the caster had used it at a level far beyond ordinary assault spells. Pierre's face hardened as he looked down the row of unconscious figures. First thing, make a treatment plan. Send people to cast Vitality Restoration if you can. It'll help them awake naturally. Vitality Restoration. André put his hands in his pockets. We don't have the staff. Delacour, standing guard by the bedside, spoke up quietly. Money is not an issue. André's eyebrows shot up. I understand. Mr. Delacour, rest assured, we'll arrange it immediately. The ward door flew open as Louis burst in, dust covering his clothes. Boss, they've been dug out. He looked at Delacour, who was still getting checked over by a clutch of witches, and sighed helplessly. Any leads? Louis stepped closer and lowered his voice into Pierre's ear. We found the maid's body and another body that might be Corvus. Might? Pierre frowned. What do you mean? That body's young but deformed, Louis said. I think Corvus made it using dark arts, some new construct, and it was found at Lestrange Manor. He handed Pierre a small magic diary. Pierre flipped through the pages. The leather book was full of strange sigils and surgical schematics, diagrams and instructions for separating flesh from bone with charms. The last entry was 2 days old. Pierre snapped the diary shut. Old Kevis had been planning something, and he'd made all the preparations. By logic, Kevis shouldn't have failed, and he certainly wouldn't have caused the crypt to collapse by accident. Pierre fell into thought and, habit, drew a cigarette. "Pierre, no smoking in the ward," Andre barked. "Sorry." Pierre drifted to the window and stared out at the crooked Parisian rooftops. Who could have ruined Kevis's plan? "Boss, can we close the case now?" Louis asked, lighting a cigarette and leaning in. Pierre exhaled a ring of smoke and gave a humorless chuckle. "We're investigating in secret, Louis. Even if we find the culprit, the senators in the Senate won't own it." "So then, do we keep going?" Louis prompted. Pierre closed his eyes for a moment, then took a long drag and said firmly, "We investigate. We need the truth, to give ourselves and this city an explanation." With the combined effect of the antidote and the vitality restoration charm, the unconscious wizards began to stir a week later. Pierre rushed to the hospital hoping for clues, but every waking mind was a dead end. Their memories stopped at the moment Corvus fell. None could recall what happened afterward. The news that the crypt had collapsed had sent them all pell-mell back to the manor, except they hadn't gone looking for answers. They'd gone for the boxes in the family vault. Barbara had woken first and clearly had no scruples about hoarding the hall. Pierre watched the quarrels over inheritances with a sinking heart, while old Kevis's coffin sat ignored. A few days after the misbegotten scramble, Rogge and Jessica followed Barbara to Père Lachaise Cemetery. Louis kept them under observation from a distance. "It must be Obliviate," he said. "I know," Pierre replied, standing beneath a tree and watching a knot of cloaked wizards. A darker possibility had occurred to him. Perhaps the hand that orchestrated the whole affair was among them. He considered a reversal charm to lift gaps in memory, then discarded the idea. The Senate had forbidden further probing. The speaker had already issued a stern warning. Pierre watched the newly awakened wizards closely, noting their mannerisms. His gaze lingered on Rogge, a child who had been unnaturally composed. Rogge's answers had been too complete, his calm too practiced. Years of cases taught Pierre to mistrust composure that came too easily. When the funeral ended, Pierre approached Jessica and her son. He forced his English into a polite stiffness. "Hello, Mrs. Jessica. May I speak with Rogge for a moment?" Rogge's chest tightened. The notes sewn into his shirt had told him more than enough. He had worked out much of the dark picture already. Jessica's brows drew together. She felt a pang that the collapse in Paris had something to do with her son. Who else could have cast Stupefy with such mastery, she wondered, apart from her child? "Mom, it's all right," Rogge murmured. "Really?" Jessica shot Pierre a pointed look. "Call me if there's anything." Her voice held a clear warning. Pierre kept his tone soft. "Rogge, do you remember what happened after Corvus fell?" "No." Rogge met his eyes evenly. "I remember up to that moment, nothing after." "No one expected him not to die," Pierre said, half to himself. "Magic is strange," Rogge replied. When Pierre asked about plans, Rogge answered, "Aunt Barbara invited us to the Alps." Pierre watched them move away. From the way Barbara had behaved earlier, Pierre suspected her so-called generosity concealed greed. She'd hoarded 2 boxes, Jessica had taken one, and the Lestrange family's magical tomes had gone to Rogge. Rogge's "no one expected him not to die" lingered in Pierre's mind as he walked away and lit another cigarette. Paris went on around him. Workmen lifted and reinforced collapsed walls. Neighbors argued about lost pets. A noblewoman outside a townhouse pressed a cat to her chest and wept, relieved to find it alive. The child's sentence hit Pierre like a blow. How had Rogge known Corvus's fall was a fake? Kevis's body had lain in the coffin the entire time. No one had opened it. Had Rogge seen the murderer? Had he seen something in the chaos and kept it to himself? Pierre ran to Delacour Manor, but a house elf told him the family had already left for Austria via the flu network. Pierre stood in the empty hallway, throat tight, and turned his cigarette pack upside down. It was empty. He looked up at the ceiling as if the next answer might fall from it. The case had only deepened. Austria, an indispensable piece of the German puzzle. From Napoleon to the Treaty of Versailles, the French would never tolerate the rise of a greater Germany. Even if Germany and Austria shared blood and language, they had to remain separate, and their relationship was constantly complicated. So when a group of French wizards turned up in Vienna and settled into an opera box to listen to Richard Strauss's Der Rosenkavalier, the moment had a streak of dark humor. After all, Strauss once wrote, "My music flows with Austrian blood." Fortunately for everyone involved, these French patrons were wizards, which made things slightly less awkward than they might otherwise have been. Rogge sat in the box with them, enduring the European high drama. He applauded when others did, a little stiffly, and leaned back, desperate for the performance to end. He'd had his heart set on the Alps, swimming, camping, barbecuing, anything but the opera. Beside him, his mother Jessica was animatedly chatting with Barbara and laughing at a joke, perfectly at home in the scene. Fleur's little sister Gabrielle suddenly poked him with one tiny finger. Her wide eyes shone as she whispered in a tone designed to be irresistible. "I saw you last night." "What night?" Rogge murmured. "The night the house shook," Gabrielle said, tugging at his sleeve. "Why was everyone lying on the lawn?" Rogge's stomach dropped. How had he forgotten the child? Late into the night, she'd been up, restless and mischievous. "You must be mistaken, little one," he said, though he sounded less convincing to himself. "Humph, you're the little imp." Gabrielle pouted, then scampered off the stool. "I'm going to tell my sister." "Do as you please," Rogge said lightly. "Children that age did exactly the opposite of what you told them not to." Gabrielle hesitated, glanced back to see if he'd stop her, then marched toward Fleur. Rogge made a show of watching the stage, casually nodding, willing her to go on. There was no evidence, and anyway, he was no longer in Paris. "Sister, Rogge is bullying me," Gabrielle wailed as she buried her face in Fleur's arms, tears suddenly welling in those enormous eyes. Fleur hushed her gently. "After the opera, I'll settle it for you, all right?" Gabrielle nodded earnestly, shot Rogge a triumphant look, and returned to her seat. Rogge tried to tell the child that Fleur couldn't possibly beat him, but he let the fantasy stand. It was easier than arguing. "It's remarkable, even though it's Muggle theater with no magic," Barbara said appreciatively. "A pity the magical world doesn't have more productions like this." "There really is one," Rogge cut in, earning a set of incredulous looks from everyone, including his mother. Did he even know what good theater was? "Really?" he insisted. "Last year, at the Hogwarts Yule Ball, there was a play where Harry Potter starred as the female lead in a love story between a wizard and a vampire." "Harry?" Jessica blinked. "How can he be the female lead?" "He's a boy," Barbara said, baffled. The box dissolved into laughter. "That would be something," someone chuckled. "A boy dressed as a girl might be adorable." Barbara glanced at Rogge, who widened his eyes and shook his head so hard an immaculate lady's hat, conjured by Fleur with a flick of her wand, promptly landed on his head. The box erupted in cheerful laughter. Rogge surrendered with a small, reluctant smile. The opera's formality had finally given way to warmth and familiarity. Down in the Alps, the Delacour's lakeside villa was a quiet retreat, a little way from the village, with pristine water and a calm that felt almost sacred. "There's a Muggle resort nearby," Mr. Delacour murmured to Fleur. "A completely different life." Gabrielle, already forgetting any plot for revenge, seized his sleeve and demanded, "I want to go! I want to go!" "Why don't your sister take you?" Fleur suggested, scooping the child into her arms. Mr. Delacour breathed easier and handed over a handful of Muggle money he'd prepared. "Would you like to come, Rogge?" Fleur asked. "Go on, sister. Take me," Gabrielle insisted, tugging at Fleur again. Rogge touched the side of his nose, surprised she'd held a grudge that long. "You go ahead," Jessica said suddenly to Rogge. He looked at her, puzzled, until she mouthed a place name, Nurmengard. "Barbara, we'll be back tonight," she added. "Should I fix dinner for you?" Barbara called. "No need, thank you." Mr. Delacour watched the others leave, then drew Barbara close. Alone together, beneath those towering peaks, the sight and silence of the Alps stirred something in him. He and Barbara surrendered to the quiet intimacy of the moment. Rogge and his mother set off along a stony path cut into the mountainside. "Mom, are we going to Nurmengard?" he asked. "That's right." Jessica's tone was sharp with disapproval. "Your headmaster actually hired a werewolf as a professor. Unbelievable." She drew her wand and swept aside a tangle of alpine bushes. I've already told Dumbledore, if this new professor, that Lupin, causes any trouble, I will see to it that someone reliable teaches defense against the dark arts. Someone like Gellert Grindelwald? Rogue murmured. It's not impossible. Jessica's answer was flat. The International Confederation of Wizards has reported his health is failing. He doesn't have many years left. A dying old man could be less dangerous than a fully fit werewolf, couldn't he? As long as he never touches a wand, Rogue said. In principle, Grindelwald could be released from Nurmengard. They stopped and looked up. Perched on a knife-edged peak, Nurmengard rose like a black sword thrust against the sky, a tower of severe lines and cold beauty. Its outer walls were hewn from deep black stone, giving it the air of an impregnable fortress. In the topmost cell, after his defeat by Dumbledore in 1945, Grindelwald had been confined in the prison he himself had built. Magic prevented apparition there. No guards walked its corridors. The place ran by enchantment alone. As Rogue and Jessica stepped closer to the gate, the old slogan carved into the stone among the creeping vines caught their attention, faded but unmistakable, for the greater good. The old door groaned open, and a damp breath rolled out from the darkness. Jessica led her son inside. She removed her gloves, flicked her wand, and the thick dust on the steps vanished as if blown away by an invisible hand. Their footsteps echoed on the stone as they descended into the ancient castle. The highest cell in Nurmengard was cold and dank. On a low, rotten wooden table, a scatter of letters lay like a forgotten symphony of time. A broken quill rested on a stained sheet, its ink frozen mid-thought. Behind the heavy iron door, Gellert Grindelwald stood tidying his worn robes. His eyes were fixed on the doorway even as he worked. The barred door kept him apart from his visitors, but he greeted them as if he could see them plainly. "Good evening, witch, and this little wizard," he said softly. "Good evening, Mr. Grindelwald." Jessica drew in a steadying breath. "I'm Jessica, and this is my son, Rogge. I presume you received my letter?" "Letter?" Grindelwald paused, then picked up a folded sheet from the table. "Shadow Apparition House, Diagon Alley, Miss Travis?" He unfolded it and read with a faint, curious smile. "Impeccable rhetoric. You must come from a respectable family. There are traces of French in the phrasing, like your accent, though it's subtle." "From France originally," Jessica said, "but we live in Britain now." Grindelwald made a soft, sympathetic sound. "I don't mean to pry. I suppose the war affected you too." Jessica's face tightened. The war years had left a hollow place in her that surfaced any time they were mentioned. She took another breath and set it aside. "The war is over. Life is quiet now, thanks to Dumbledore's mediation. No one wants to be haunted by the past. I didn't come to reminisce, Mr. Grindelwald. I came because I need your help." For a moment, Grindelwald was unreadable, like some old mechanism caught between motions. Then he said quietly, "Help? I would like to invite you to be the Defense Against the Dark Arts professor at Hogwarts." Jessica's voice was steady. She didn't wait for his interruption. "Not right away, but I have the right, as a member of the Board of Governors, to nominate a candidate." Grindelwald's expression flickered through surprise, amusement, and something more guarded. "Hogwarts. Why would they invite me?" he asked. "The wizarding world is uneasy," Jessica said. "Lord Voldemort could return at any time. Dumbledore has a habit of appointing unreliable candidates to Defense Against the Dark Arts. As a mother and as a governor, I cannot tolerate a dangerous werewolf becoming the children's professor." "Werewolf?" Grindelwald considered the word. He had disagreed once with Albus. Their ideals had split and never fully reconciled, but he understood the man well enough to predict the sort of stubbornness Dumbledore would show. He let a small, almost bitter smile touch his lips. "I suppose Albus rejected your nominee." "You understand him," Jessica said without surprise. "But the board has given me the power to nominate. If problems arise, the board can dismiss the professor. That werewolf will not last." For a long moment, Grindelwald said nothing. The offer, the possibility of leaving this place, it touched something he had declared settled years ago. Finally, he answered, very quietly, "I refuse." Jessica's surprise was immediate. "You refuse? Mr. Grindelwald, you chose this prison perhaps, but you do not have to remain here forever. Accept this and leave Nurmengard. Refuse, and you will wither away in obscurity in this cold castle." He turned his head away from her pleading, the lines of his face hardening. "No," he said simply. His voice carried the weight of the decisions he had already made. "I am here by choice." She snorted, sharp with impatience and anger, and turned to go. Rogge lingered a moment, then reached into his pocket. He pressed a small photograph through the ankle-high window in the door and let it slip to Grindelwald's side. "A gift, Mr. Grindelwald," he said, his voice strangely low and almost reverent. "Perhaps it will help you understand the death of Midsummer." Then mother and son left Nurmengard, their footsteps receding into the damp corridor. Grindelwald stayed behind the cell door, alone with the photograph resting on the table. He leaned over it, and his breath caught. The image showed Albus Dumbledore older now, no longer the bright, passionate youth, nor merely the rival from a shared past, but a kindly, weathered man who bore time with a dignity that made Grindelwald's chest ache. Grindelwald ran a fingertip over the picture, as if he could still feel the warmth of those old days. For a moment, a small, sad smile softened his face. Albus's eyes in the photograph seemed to hold the same tenderness Grindelwald had once known. "Long time," he whispered. But the boy's last words, "the death of Midsummer," had lodged in his mind like a splinter. A sullen dread rose in him, and he could not leave the photograph untouched. Without wand or ceremony, he breathed a single spell, aguamenti. Water welled up on the table and pooled, a shimmering mirror. Grindelwald stared into it, seeking whatever future the plane of water might reveal. The image that rose in the liquid splintered him. He watched, as if through someone else's eyes, and went utterly still. On the water's surface, Dumbledore stood on a high tower, and then was struck by a flash of green light. Avada Kedavra. The force hurled him from the battlements. The fall, the silence, the extinguishing. Grindelwald's throat closed. Tears pricked his eyes, unbidden. He had never expected to see this. The notion of Albus taken like that was a blade. He forced himself to draw breath and tried the vision again. The second showing was crueler for its clarity. Dumbledore steadfast and unafraid as death took him. Determination in his eyes to the last. Fate seemed fixed and absolute. "No!" Grindelwald dropped to his knees, clutching the edge of the table until his fingers ached. He felt as if his chest would split. If it could be foreseen, perhaps it could be altered. The thought kindled a ferocious, irrational hope. He curled his hands around the photograph, as if it were something living, and whispered into the small, cold cell, "Forgive me for everything. I will not let this happen. I will change it. I will always love you." At his words, the highest point of Nurmengard shuddered with a sudden magical tremor. Dark clouds gathered above the castle, and lightning split the sky as if answering some urgent summoning. The air hummed with power. Outside, where the corridor opened to the night, Rogge glanced upward at the hardening sky. "Is it going to rain?" he murmured. And then, as if born of the crackling air itself, a phantom stepped between the stones before them, a presence that made the world incline toward it, heavy with portent. The phantom resolved into flesh, and Grindelwald stood before them. Lightning flashed across the clearing, outlining the dark wizard's gaunt frame. He was thin to the point of fragility, and his skin was almost translucent, but his cold, fathomless eyes betrayed a strength that belied his frail body. The forest seemed to darken around him. The air took on a charged, uneasy quality. He regarded Jessica and Rogge with calm, unconcerned composure, as if he had no fear of being discovered. When his gaze swept over them, lightning crackled so close they felt it at their temples, and their muscles went taut. "Who's there?" His voice was low and commanding, fixed on Rogge. "Grindelwald," Jessica hissed, drawing her wand and stepping in front of her son, shielding him. "Mom, it's all right." Rogge made a small, calming gesture. He lifted his head and met the dark wizard's stare without flinching. A faint smile touched his lips. "Mr. Grindelwald, magic is wonderful. The death in Midsummer is only a prophecy. Like every prophecy, it might be inevitable, or it might be wrong." A violet bolt split the sky with an ear-splitting roar, as if the heavens themselves had been rent. The flash washed their faces in white light. The first heavy raindrops began to fall. "Prophecy?" Grindelwald murmured, eyes narrowing. "You have no seer's sight. You cannot read the future." "Magic is always wonderful," Rogge repeated evenly. The two of them held one another's gaze, two stubborn bulls testing who would yield. Grindelwald's expression sharpened. Rogge met him without wavering. At last, the old man closed his eyes. He breathed out, steadying whatever storm was running through him, and said, with quiet finality, "I will accept the professorship, but not later, now." Jessica started. The word now made no sense. What could the death in midsummer have to do with such a sudden shift in the Dark Wizard? "Grindelwald, not here," she began, but his look cut across her words like a blade. It chilled the air, robbed her of courage. She forced herself on. "The Board of Governors and Dumbledore have already discussed this," she protested. "If the werewolf, tell me his name, the wolf cub killed." Grindelwald's voice was flat, as if naming a fly. Jessica stared at him, stunned. This was the man who had once laid siege to an entire era, yet he spoke of murder with an almost indifferent calm. "That professor was specially invited by the headmaster," Rogge said, reminding him. "You know our headmaster. If you kill him, you'll never get into Hogwarts." "He is the greatest white wizard alive," Jessica added. "It will take something extraordinary for the board to compel Dumbledore to step aside." Grindelwald let out a bitter laugh that merged with the thunder and felt like ice against the skin. Rogge suppressed a smirk. He hadn't been born blind. He set aside the small portrait he'd been carrying. Grindelwald's memories of Dumbledore were a trap Rogge knew how to use. If Grindelwald still loved Dumbledore, if the past still caught at him, then given Rogge's clues, he might be tempted to peer into what fate would bring. And what would he see? A plan. Dumbledore felled by a killing curse he designed for himself. A young boy named Harry made a savior by fate. Rogge didn't care for that. What made his blood boil was the instrument. Severus Snape, the one who would be remembered as Dumbledore's executioner. His own professor, brilliant at potions, reduced to the scapegoat who would bear eternal infamy. No matter how Dumbledore painted Snape afterward, the truth of being called a murderer would ruin him. Let prophecy fight prophecy, Rogge thought. Let darkness face darkness. If Grindelwald would not stand by and watch, then let him act, to counter the death in midsummer with another fate. Let lovers be pitted against lovers. As for Rogge himself, he was just an ordinary Hogwarts student. Surely he had no sinister motive. Grindelwald's reaction was even stronger than Rogge had hoped, but then, half a century in Nurmengard had not dulled him. Rogge produced a leather pouch and flung it to the Dark Wizard. "Professor-in-waiting," he said lightly, "you aren't the man you were. Your wand was confiscated. A prospective professor should at least look presentable." The pouch clinked with galleons. Grindelwald snatched up the money, slicked rainwater from his face, and began to step back into the trees. Rogge called after him, casually. "The board's appointment letter will be sent to you. Where should they post it? Your address?" "Whatever," Grindelwald muttered, turning away. "How about the Hog's Head in Hogsmeade?" Rogge tossed out with a grin. Grindelwald nearly stopped. He turned, a hard look on his face. He knew too well Aberforth's bar. The blood between him and the Dumbledores ran deep. Ariana's death, that terrible tragedy, had stained them all. If Grindelwald set foot in the Hog's Head, Aberforth might well try to sever his head and hang it over the bar like a warning. Grindelwald's jaw tightened in a rare show of emotion. That reaction pleased Rogge enough to change tack. "Or the leaky cauldron in Diagon Alley," he suggested in a still cheerier tone. "You might even run into the headmaster's favorite student." "Favorite student?" Grindelwald's voice held a strange mix of curiosity and scorn. Then, as if fearing more entreaties, he melted into the undergrowth and was gone. Jessica let her wand lower, only when the shape disappeared among the trees. Her thigh and chest trembled with nerves she hadn't known she'd been holding. If not for the need to protect Rogge, she would never have dared aim a wand at Grindelwald in her life. But the stranger's acceptance of the professorship, so sudden, left questions burning. "What is the death in midsummer?" she demanded once they were moving, frowning at her son. Rain soaked them to the skin. "Mom, it's pouring. Can we talk when we get back?" Rogge asked, cautious. "Out with it," Jessica snapped and began to lead them back down the path. By the time they reached the villa, Barbara's family was asleep. Jessica brought in fruit and vegetables, ladled warm meat soup to settle rumbling stomachs, and then stared at Rogge across the small kitchen table. "The death in midsummer is a prophecy," he said. "A prophecy?" Jessica wiped her mouth and let the spoon clatter back into the bowl. What prophecy? He's been locked in Nurmengard for decades. How would he even know a new prophecy? Regarding the prophecy, I heard it from a centaur, Rogge blurted, fishing for a convenient scapegoat. He knew Jessica couldn't very well check with the centaur her son had invented. The stars foretold something dangerous. The divination was not optimistic, and Grindelwald, he has his own powerful prophetic sight. Jessica thought of Grindelwald's expression and after a moment said, "If the prophecy is true, we must prepare." "Prepare for what?" Rogge asked. "Prepare to fill the power vacuum," Jessica answered calmly. "Power never simply vanishes. When Dumbledore dies, every bit of influence he holds, tangible and otherwise, will scatter. Son, you must understand. The king is dead. Long live the king." Rogge, chewing his bread, stopped mid-bite. He'd heard the phrase before, but hearing it now made him see it differently. A king's body could be destroyed by death or by violence, but the power he represented didn't die. A new ruler would rise and inherit everything. The crown would be cheered on. The king, in essence, never dies. The thing was always there, cool and watchful. Rogge gazed out at the rain-wet valley and said slowly, "If Grindelwald is out there, he'll do everything he can to stop the prophecy. Perhaps Midsummer Night will fizzle out." Jessica shook her head. "Perhaps it is our very efforts to prevent it that make it happen. History is full of wizards who tried to stop prophecies," she continued. "And when those prophecies came true, they found themselves unwittingly complicit." Rogge didn't entirely agree. He liked to think destiny hadn't included him. The Midsummer Night would have run its course without his interference. Now he'd thrown a wrench into the gears. Would fate still play out as written? He stared at the rain-blurred world and felt a stubborn urge to challenge whatever the stars promised. Barbara, dressed in finery, stood by the hearth holding Jessica's hand. "Jessica, the hills in Britain are so small. What is Ben Nevis next to the Alps? Like molehills. You should buy a chalet there for holidays. Delacour mentioned the Muggles go skiing at Christmas. If that's too vulgar, there's Vienna for the opera. Muggles do have their uses." Jessica's smile thinned. Even as she left, Barbara couldn't resist a jibe. "The Alps are magnificent, but full of Muggle resorts," Jessica said, shaking her head. "I prefer places with more wizards." "Goodbye, Barbara." She tossed the flu powder and disappeared, but secretly vowed to buy an alpine manor higher, larger, and more lavish than Delacour's. Back at their Thameside villa, Jessica picked up the Muggle phone. "Son, what's Andrew's number?" "Huh?" Rogge, sipping iced cola, blinked toward the window. "Is the sun setting in the east?" "Mom, what are you planning?" "Isn't he our Muggle asset manager? I'm going to have him find some antiques." Rogge choked on a large gulp of cola and spluttered. "That direct? I'll get it." He passed her the number and sighed inwardly. The trip to Paris had clearly stirred Jessica. To her, the Muggle money Andrew handled might as well be scrap paper. Using it to buy antiques seemed perfectly reasonable. It wasn't hard to imagine Jessica becoming every dealer's favorite client. "British Museum?" she asked as Andrew answered. "Can you really get something out of there?" "Money's not a problem. I want exquisite items. If they try to sell me fakes, I'll let them taste a witch's wrath." Rogge leaned in. "What did he say?" "He said he knows some antique traders." "No, antique traffickers," Jessica corrected herself, not sure of the distinction. "They can move items out of Muggle museums." She waved her wand, changed into an elegant outfit, and surveyed their comparatively drab sitting room. "Our home must not be inferior to Delacour Manor. Next time, I'll make her blush." "Is that necessary?" Rogge asked. "Yes!" Jessica answered without hesitation. Watching his mother stride away, Rogge shook his head, gathered the owl-delivered newspapers and letters piled on the sofa, and began to read. The Daily Prophet declared Arthur the luckiest wizard of the year. Not only was he transferred back to the ministry from some post in the Arctic, but he'd also won the paper's grand prize. 700 galleons had vanished on their trip to Egypt. Rogge clicked his tongue at the family's spending. In a world still recovering from certain financial disasters, that sum could be worth nearly £10,000 on the black market, officially about $3,500. For 9 people to spend it in a month was extravagance bordering on the absurd. Rogge suspected the Weasleys had been fleeced. The Weasley family photo showed them grinning in front of a huge pyramid, and, of course, there was a rat perched on Ron's shoulder. Rogge set that paper down and plucked up another with a bold headline, "Sirius Black's Escape from Azkaban." Seeing the two front pages side by side made him grin. If Lupin's offer letter were here, the Marauders lineup James Potter organized would be nearly complete. Other articles were less interesting. A wizard discovering a supposedly dark artifact, a ministry investigation, and the predictable result: no Horcruxes, just wasted fear and manpower. He opened the parcels from friends. Neville's packet contained the results of the Cola Project, a hair-growing grass. 1 leaf a day, and hair would sprout, unfortunately, bright green. Rogge stared at the half-grown green sprig and swore he'd never try it. He could, however, see a market in Ireland where green meant everything, or among financiers who liked their ledgers verdant. Theodore's contribution was a bottle of magical drink that promised a new flavor with every sip. Rogge took one cautious taste and immediately spat it out. "This is not what I asked for," he muttered. "I asked for a magical cola, not a potion that tastes like a bag of every flavor beans." He took a deep breath and calmed himself. At least Theodore's drink would probably appeal to most wizards. Anthony and Terry were experimenting with bicycles, curious about how muggles balanced on 2 wheels. Malfoy had tacked a modification onto a flashlight so it glowed perpetually when charged with magic. Lumos was still better, Rogge thought, but Malfoy boasted in his letter that he needed to conserve his energy for Quidditch practice. Daphne, Hermione, and Susan were still touring the Muggle world and hadn't settled renovation plans. Hermione complained that the Eiffel Tower slanted like the Leaning Tower of Pisa and that Paris was under construction everywhere. Nothing like the romantic city in her head. Rogge smiled, despite himself. With wizards around, Paris would be put right soon enough. Newt's letter urged a meeting. "It's time to breed golden snitches," it read, and Rogge folded it in with the others, a small, private smile tugging at him. After a year of tireless work, Newt had finally returned the magical creatures the Thunderbird Party had poached to their native habitats. Where poachers had wrecked homes, his magic mended fences and roofs, coaxed broken burrows closed, and coaxed ruined glades back to their old peace and beauty. For the creatures that had died, there was no remedy. Their warm, curious lives could not be restored. On his travels, he met American aurors more than once. They were charged with rounding up poachers and spent their days racing from one crisis to another. At first, they were implacable enemies of the thieves. Over time, however, Dumbledore's pressure eased and their priorities shifted. Interest and convenience crept in. A few offenders were let go. Newt sighed. This pattern was not new to him. In decades of study, he had watched the same slow corrosion. First, people took the spoils and punished nobody. Then they learned to ignore the wrongdoing altogether. Finally, everyone colluded, and the line between right and wrong blurred. He had not attended the Halloween trial. Friends had told him that poaching had reached even into the student body at Hogwarts. Excuses were offered, but the crimes remained. Still, neither Dumbledore nor the Ministry saw fit to impose even a token punishment. Newt heard more disturbing news. In 1992, a unicorn had been slain in the Forbidden Forest. Innocent spirits had been butchered by unrestrained men. The news weighed on him. An elderly wizard approaching 100, he felt increasingly powerless. So he returned to Dorset and stopped wandering. In the years he had left, he held one simple wish: to return the golden snidget to the magical world and watch it fly free across open skies. Now, in Ireland at Travis Manor, he stepped out of the hearth under the veil of fireplace smoke, carrying his battered magizoological case. "Mr. Newt, sorry I'm late," Roger said hastily as he hurried up to meet him. "I'm afraid I kept you waiting." "It's all right," Newt said kindly. "They've been dormant for hundreds of years. A day or two won't make a difference." He smiled and followed Roger through the house, taking in the fresh, light architecture of the manor. Clean lines, airy rooms, an atmosphere that seemed to promise hope. At the back of the estate, a small glass pyramid caught the light. Newt paused, recalling the Louvre. The design felt faintly Parisian. "You were in France?" he asked. Roger's face shifted, half apology, half reminiscence. "A few days in Paris. I went to Corvus Visseg's funeral." "Lestrange," Newt murmured the name in French. Roger watched him curiously. Newt had not been idle during what little time he'd spared for himself. Besides practicing charms, he'd been learning French. He'd grown fond of foreign languages. "Lita?" Roger asked softly. Newt looked at him, a shadow crossing his features. "An old friend. She stopped something dreadful from happening." "Yes, Père Lachaise," Roger said. "Was he buried there?" "Yes." Newt's voice was quiet. Roger added, "The Lestrange line in France is gone." Newt only nodded and produced his wand without ceremony. It appeared plain at a glance, short, no fancy etchings, almost the sort of stick someone might joke about using as chopsticks. But the wand was a careful construct, an ashwood handle inlaid with belemnite from fossilized shells, a luminous mother-of-pearl core. Years of use had left it scarred and dented. Every mark told of a narrow escape or a long journey. It was a wand that had been tested by adventure and magic alike. He touched the wand to the pyramid, and the glass shimmered. Panels flipped and tilted with a stuttering cascade of refractions, scattering light into a dazzling kaleidoscope. Roger felt an expansion of space, something like the undetectable extension charm, but more intricate. Newt drew a bright beam of light from his wand. It pierced the pyramid's pane, forming concentric rings of rotating light inside. The rings spun on different axes, and the magic swelled the interior as if inflating a hidden world. Newt moved like a conductor, tracing complex runes through the air. Roger watched and tried to memorize each curl and angle. Shapes blurred and coalesced within the glass until, with a sudden white flash, the pyramid settled. "That should do it. The basic space is built," Newt said, wiping his forehead. "You can choose an entry password." "Open Sesame?" Roger offered, half joking, then flushed. "No, that's too obvious. A password can be a phrase, a wand movement, even a stone pressed against the crystal," Newt said. "We'll decide later. Let's go inside." The glass curtain softened, as if it were a thin sheet of water, permitting them to pass. Inside the pyramid, the space was large and blank, an empty canvas waiting for life. "This is an upgraded, undetectable extension charm," Newt explained as he walked. "If you intend to breed magical creatures, you must reproduce their ecosystems. The charm alone can hold space, but you must also simulate the climate, flora, and terrain." He raised his wand, and the light at its tip began to shift. White to blue, then green, then a cascade of hues. Each color corresponded to an ecological element. Blue rippled into lakes and streams. Green coaxed trunks and ferns into growth. Newt quickened his movements. Yellow became sun-baked desert. Gray turned into jagged highlands. The colors layered and harmonized until the void filled with a tapestry of habitats. Trees shot up from seed to towering canopy. Grass unfurled into carpets of green, and water smoothed into silver lakes. Mountains etched themselves into the skyline. A breeze seemed to ripple across the newly grown meadow. Newt's wand flashed once more, and the tableau stilled, a vibrant, balanced, magical menagerie tucked within crystal walls. "I built a marsh over here," Newt said with a small, pleased smile. "Something like the Quidditch marsh. Golden snidgets should take to it." Roger's eyes shone. The space before them was nothing less than wondrous. Even for a wizard, Newt's spatial magic felt extraordinary. "Can you teach me?" Roger asked eagerly. "Of course," Newt said readily. "This is an extension of the undetectable extension charm. I'll stay here to breed the snidgets. Ask whatever you like." Roger produced a nest with reverent hands. Ancient magic hummed from the woven twigs. A soft golden light shimmered across the surface. Nestled within were 5 eggs, small, pale, and waiting. They had been silent for centuries, dormant and patient. Newt crouched to look, a gentle, almost boyish wonder on his face. "All right," he said softly. "Let's wake them up." Newt carved an oval hollow in the tree with a faint flick of magic and eased the nest inside with practiced care. The hollow thrummed with an ancient, shimmering magic, centuries old, that had guarded these golden snidget eggs from the outside world. If Bowman had not hidden this nest in that veil of light and shadow long ago, the creature's last traces would have been lost to time. "A few months ago, I investigated the Forbidden Forest," Newt said, stroking the eggs through the protective field. "The centaurs told me they used to protect golden snidgets over 100 years ago." "The centaur tribe? What happened to them? Are any golden snidgets still there?" Rogge asked. "Not anymore." Newt shook his head. "The centaurs never attempted active conservation or breeding. They let the Snidgets fend for themselves in the forest. The Snidgets are fast, but the forbidden forest is full of dangerous things. They were too fragile to survive attacks from other creatures, Newt sighed. Those few that remained became food. This nest might be our last chance, Newt said, nodding to Rogge. He indicated that Rogge could lift the ward. Rogge extended a finger. Ancient magic gathered at the tip. When his fingertip brushed the golden shield, it unraveled into 1,000 threads of light. After 100 years sealed away, the golden Snidget eggs were returned to the open world. Newt and Rogge felt the surge of life from within the shells and found themselves clenching their fists with excitement. Rogge activated the familiar eye. Information flowed before him. Golden Snidget egg, golden Snidget, grade A characteristics. Extremely agile, fast flight, able to pass through narrow spaces, razor-sharp beak, can peck through hard objects, timid, highly skittish, skill, flash peck level 0. Breeding plan, incubation procedures tailored to egg condition. Nest, warm, dry, sheltered against wind to maintain stable temperatures. Optimal incubation, 20-25 grihas. Moderate spatial fluctuations during incubation may result in flash teleportation talent, short-range spatial traversal. Incubation time, 1 to 2 weeks. Diet, after hatching, high protein intake required to support growth and flight. Large insects and small fish recommended. Magical mushrooms may be used to balance the diet. Intensified training recommended post-hatch. I never realized the familiar eye would be so useful, Rogge admitted, looking at Newt. He still didn't have the same affection for creatures that Newt clearly did. For now, his interest was more academic. The nest is well made, Newt said, turning the egg gently and nodding. It looks like the Snidgets built it themselves, dry, warm, perfect for incubation. He sighed softly as he examined the tiny shells. They're so small, completely different from Akamis. Akamis? The ones with wings that get 15 feet long? Rogge asked. Newt brightened. Exactly. Akami chicks are larger than adult golden Snidgets when they hatch. They're blue and very instinctive about self-preservation. Their eggshells are silver, soft but pure, the lightest and most malleable silver you'll ever see. Even the best silversmith would struggle to replicate them. Light and soft? Rogge mused. The description reminded him of mithril, rare, strong, and feather-light. He pulled out a sword that gleamed with a silver sheen. This sword, Newt inspected it with keen interest. If I'm not mistaken, that's a legacy from Godric Gryffindor. The headmaster lent it to me, Rogge began, then changed his story. I actually traded for it with the headmaster, for something valuable. Newt laughed. That shows he has high hopes for you. For what? Rogge asked. For courage. The sword stands for bravery and daring. Newt eyed him thoughtfully. You might be in Slytherin, but you're not lacking in courage. Rogge considered the claim. His exploits, fighting acromantulas, arguing with the headmaster, questioning the House Cup, even building a tower for Slytherin, had required nerve, but he preferred to call it strategy rather than reckless bravery. Still, he handed the sword to Newt. It's light and incredibly tough. Could goblins have used Akami eggshell in the forging? It's possible, Newt said. This is my first close look at a sword like this. One-handed, cross-shaped, hilt set with rubies, blade-etched Godric Gryffindor. It's surprisingly light, perfect for a knight. Akami shells behave like metal. If goblins incorporated them, they could cast very fine weapons. But it takes extraordinary skill to process the shells. Only goblins could likely do it. Wait here. Newt opened his case and climbed inside, rummaging. He emerged with a piece of eggshell. Rogge took it. Soft, almost gelatinous to the touch, impossibly light. I once gave a box of Akami shells to a muggle, Newt said with a grin. It helped him open a bakery. Rogge thought of Gilderoy, the goblin who'd held back on teaching certain forging secrets, and marveled at how magical creature materials were still barely understood. If Akami shell could be turned into armor or weapons, battles would be very different. Creatures like nifflers, bowtruckles, and demiguises had uses yet to be fully explored. No wonder Newt's book wasn't called the Encyclopedia of Magical Creatures, but Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them. You have any extra shells? Rogge asked. They usually get eaten by the chicks, Newt said, but the niffler hides a few in his lair. Come on. He ducked back into the case and nudged a sleeping niffler in a hollow. The small, black-furred creature had a long, platypus-like snout and a belly that functioned like a pocket with endless space. Newt lifted the flap to reveal a deep, broad cavity, at least 20 feet down, filled with hoarded treasures. "Eggshells come here," Newt muttered, waving his wand. A cascade of jewels, coins, and silver tumbled out. The Niffler woke with a chitter of alarm. Its treasure was spilling. It launched into the pile, frantically stuffing gold bars, necklaces, glass beads, and, of course, countless eggshells back into its pouch. Rogge laughed at the Niffler's panic. So this was the Niffler's little stash. Countless pieces of eggshell clinked across the floor and pooled at the bottom. The commotion drew the attention of the nearby Akamis. They peered out with wide, curious eyes at their scattered shells. Surrounded by small, iridescent bodies, Rogge felt a flicker of nervousness. Newt, however, calmly reached out and patted them like a mother soothing children. "Good little ones," he murmured, and the Akamis settled, curious but unafraid under his gentle touch. After a week of waiting, 5 golden snidget eggs finally hatched one after another on a clear morning. The eggs were nestled closely in the hay. Newt and Rogge stood over the nest, expectant. Bubble was hovering with his camera, finger ready on the shutter. The eggshell on the far right trembled first. A tiny claw pushed out, then another. 2 little feet found purchase on the straw, and with small, determined kicks, began to lever the heavy shell open. The chick inside peeped faintly, a helpless little cry, as if calling for aid from the world beyond its shell. Newt watched without intervening. He opened his pocket watch to time the process and murmured to Rogge, who was watching intently. "A bird's life truly begins the moment it hatches on its own," he said. "When they're ready in the egg, they face a life-or-death test. The air inside is limited. They must peck their way out quickly, or they'll suffocate." Rogge frowned at the struggling chick. "But this one is strange. Why are its claws first?" Normally, a chick's beak is the hardest part of its body, the tool it uses to break the shell and get its first breath. This little snidget was the opposite. Its legs had already burst through, while its head and body remained trapped. Newt made a careful note in his notebook. "Perhaps it's a unique trait of the golden snidget," he said. Before he could finish, the other 4 eggs began to shiver. Firm, determined pecks sounded in quick succession. Shell fragments fell away, and as they did, the nest filled with a golden light. 4 tiny golden snidgets tumbled out, round-bellied and shimmering with bright golden feathers. Their beaks were slender and sharp. Their ruby eyes glinted with curious intelligence. Newt gently assisted them with their final sheds, and the 4 promptly set about pecking at the food he'd prepared. The first chick, however, remained trapped. It looked, comically and pitifully, like a miniature version of a certain animated wolf character. Ra couldn't help the comparison. "Should we help it?" he asked. Newt hesitated. "Sometimes it's necessary." He took a silver needle from his pocket and scored a tiny crack in the shell. With a sudden shake, the chick pulled itself free. Its siblings, having already eaten bits of their shells, were busy flapping and exploring. Even at that size, their wings were capable and quick. Their joints rotated nimbly, allowing them to change direction in midair with astonishing speed. In the sunlight, they flashed like golden shuttles. Nova 1, newly hatched, chirped loudly and attempted to follow, but as soon as it left the nest, it swayed and plunged toward the ground. Rogge lunged to catch it. Newt stopped him with a firm hand. "Wait." At the last second, the chick righted itself and fluttered upward, awkward and far slower than its siblings, but determined. "Birds have their own survival logic," Newt said. "Sometimes our sympathy does more harm than good." Rogge lowered his hand, thoughtful. Bubble handed Newt the photos he'd taken, and Newt added details to his notes, cross-referencing the pictures. Rogge flipped through the images, lingering on a shot of number 1 thumping to the ground and then flapping back into the air. He tucked the photo into an envelope, preparing to send it to the Daily Prophet. Newt put a hand on Rogge's shoulder. "I don't advise that." Rogge looked up. "Why not?" "The golden snidget is an extremely valuable creature," Newt said quietly. "Its feathers and eyes are sought-after ingredients for many unusual potions. If word spreads that they've returned, their survival will be immediately threatened. It could drive them to extinction all over again. We should wait until their numbers are stable before announcing anything to the wider magical community." Rogge wasn't convinced. He took a breath and explained his plan. Just the two of us, even with help. We can't protect them forever. They've already gone extinct once. What if it happens again? We were lucky to find these eggs. Future finders might not be so fortunate. There are powerful wizards in the City Hall gardens and other places that could interfere. Newt nodded. I built this breeding ground to give them a chance to come back. I want something more than waiting, Rogge said. Next year, Britain is hosting the Quidditch World Cup. It will draw the entire magical community. We can use the Cup's influence to announce the Snidget's return and make them the mascot of Quidditch. Shape public opinion, create laws. Any wizard who dares to harm or traffic in golden Snidgets would face severe punishment. Rogge's eyes were fierce. I know some Snidgets might die in the process of exposure, but if we enshrine them, if they're protected by law and by public sentiment, poachers won't be able to wipe them out. Newt considered the suggestion. Your plan has merit, he admitted slowly. If the Snidget became symbolic of Quidditch, it would enjoy extraordinary protection, but we still need to be cautious. The population must be stable first. Promise me one thing. You must preserve a nest of eggs using old magic, like Bowman did, so that if anything goes wrong, we have a reserve. No problem. Can I send the letter now? Rogge asked, eager. Newt nodded and touched his quill to parchment. The quill wrote for him. I'll contact friends in the magical community, Newt said. I'll ask for help. For the time being, this breeding ground will be temporarily under my watch. Rogge bowed slightly. It's an honor. Have you thought of a password? Newt asked. Balala Ken Dagwa, Rogge replied. Newt blinked. He heard the rhythm and was struck by how close Ken Dagwa sounded to the killing curse. Is that a spell? It isn't, Rogge said briskly. Just a silly password. It has no effect. Very well, Newt said, amused. He handed the letter back to Rogge and turned his attention once more to the Snidgets. He mimicked their peeps and small wing beats, and several of them hopped toward him, curious and unafraid. Rogge watched him, admiration plain on his face. Newt's devotion to magical creatures was total. Even with Rogge's Eye of the Magic Pet, which gave him special insight, he felt he couldn't match Newt's single-minded expertise. Scamander, Rogge thought, was made for research rather than public life. He deserved his title, Master of Magical Creatures. With the letter in hand, Rogge made a few practical resolutions. He could have sent the photos straight to Miss Rita at the Daily Prophet, but he distrusted her penchant for sensationalizing facts. Instead, he decided he would deliver the story in person. While he was in London, he'd pick up his third-year textbooks and, if he had time, check whether Grindelwald was lurking at the leaky cauldron. For now, the Snidgets were safe, flitting in the sunlight and peeping for more food. Newt resumed his notes, and Rogge, feeling both humbled and hopeful, stepped away to prepare the letter he hoped would, in time, give these golden little birds the protection they deserved. The leaky cauldron was low-ceilinged and dim, with a few slants of sunlight slicing through the high windows and catching the dust motes that hung in the air. Wizards sat in small clusters, exchanging news. Above all, the talk of the hour. Sirius Black's escape from Azkaban. Isn't Azkaban the most secure prison there is? How could this happen? Someone demanded. It probably has something to do with the reforms a few years back, another said. Reforms? Tell me about them. I haven't been back in London for years. Tom, 2 beers. 2 oak tankards flew from the bar, and the scarred, shifty-eyed wizard who had been listening slowly began to speak. 2 years ago, they discovered a serious breach at Azkaban. It was Old Tom, a cup of tea. A lanky figure leaning against the counter intercepted. Rogue's ears pricked at the conversation. The scarred wizard's face looked familiar, as if Rogue had seen him at the ministry. Ah yes, the Auror temporary holding cells. Well, what was it? Spit it out. It was a very serious violation. The scarred man cast a brief look at Rogue before continuing. You can look it up yourself. The whole magical community leaned on the minister. The ministry introduced a series of measures to calm things down, another added. Is that all? What does that have to do with Sirius Black? It has everything to do with it. The ministry revised Azkaban's management, tiered the prisoners according to how dangerous they were. Before, Azkaban was guarded by the Dementors. Now, they're ordered to keep to the walls mostly, only come out now and then. They even changed prisoner treatment. People can receive visitors, write letters. Sounds wonderful. Let's raise a glass to Minister Fudge and his brilliant reforms. Wonderful? More than that. The scarred wizard grinned. Everyone in Azkaban is cultured, so well-spoken. I could stay there forever. A wizard across from him promptly spat beer in disbelief, spraying foam across the man's face. Sorry. I didn't mean. It's all right. Life is for experiencing things. You have to live, even Azkaban. Only then is life complete. He dabbed his face, a curious mix of frankness, nostalgia, and something like philosophy in his voice. This year, the ministry improved conditions even more. Now prisoners can have certain recreation under the supervision of dementors. The new policy drew a curious crowd. Someone muttered that the ministry issued the reforms to get more public sympathy for the minister. For a time, the papers had been full of Dumbledore's picture because of the Easter trial, and Fudge had nearly been forgotten. But Black killed 13 people. He's monstrous. Can he really write letters and play in recreation? Probably. Otherwise, how would he have escaped? His cell was on the lowest level. This one's dangerous. Look at his photo. He's insane. I heard he followed Lord Voldemort. I heard the Dementors are searching for him on the Ministry's orders. The pub buzzed with speculation about what Sirius Black might do now that he had escaped. Revenge, murder, a search for someone in particular? Rogue listened in silence. Most of the talk was wildly exaggerated. The big black dog had probably only run after a rat, he thought. Old Tom, Rogue asked suddenly, is there a wizard named Grindelwald renting rooms here? From Europe? Old Tom froze mid-polish. That surname still left a bad taste in his mouth. He had taken over the Leaky Cauldron decades ago, back when the magical world spoke of a different dangerous man named Grindelwald. Compared to him, Sirius Black and Voldemort were small time. Old Tom looked at Rogue, reminding himself that this boy, Tom, he knew, must mean someone else. After all, though he shared the name Tom, this lad had nothing to do with Lord Voldemort. No, Old Tom said finally. No Grindelwald. Still not here? Rogue muttered. He wouldn't have gone to the Hogsmeade Hog's Head, would he? Old Tom hesitated a moment longer and added, there is an old wizard called Green, in room 7. Odd fellow, leaves early, comes back late. No idea what he's up to. Green, Rogue repeated, the name and the room number slotting into place. It could be an alias for Grindelwald. Never mind, I'll go to the Daily Prophet. He left a few nuts on the counter. He couldn't stand the Leaky Cauldron's tea from Barat without milk. Diagon Alley was livelier than it had been in years. Little witches and wizards scurried in pairs and threes, a cheerful swarm darting between the shops. The firebolt gleamed in the Quidditch Emporium window, children pressing their faces to the glass. Opposite, a new, colorful magic carpet shop had opened. Though small, it did a brisk trade. Witches shuffled through yards of patterned weave, tugging and fingering like customers in a fabric shop. Carpets made more sense than brooms for family travel. At the junction where Diagon Alley met Nocturne Alley, business at Shadow Apparition House was booming. Sophie, cheeks flushed, had picture cards spread out before her and was locked in a fierce match with a customer. I won, she crowed, peering at her opponent's collection and pulling a rare South American wizard card into her hand. How could you pack Dumbledore and Grindelwald into the same deck? Who said I couldn't? Sophie replied, triumphant. Rogue didn't disturb them. The shop ran mostly on enchanted automation now, and Sophie only handled unusual cases. Lately, she'd earned the nickname Auto Chess Queen among the card players. Her deck contained rare pictures from across the world, and paired with her skill, challengers returned defeated. Rogue turned toward the Daily Prophet. As he passed Florian Fortescue's ice cream parlor, he noticed Harry bent over a parchment, writing an essay. The boy looked up, their eyes met for a beat, then both quickly looked away. Harry snorted softly and resumed writing. Rita Skeeter, bright and flamboyantly dressed, ushered Rogue into her office with a theatrical gasp. Rogue, you're almost as tall as me now, she exclaimed. When I first saw you, you were such a little thing. Rogue got to business. He handed her the photograph of the golden snitch. Rita adjusted her glasses. A splendid shot. There's defiance in it, she said, but her critic's eye was already at work. The angle isn't quite right, and the lighting could have been handled better. If you're aiming for best photograph of the year, it'll need work. Rita's columns were notorious, sharp, unsparing critique that that drove both sales and resentment. The more she tore into people's submissions, the more everyone bought the paper and submitted more pictures. Rogge knew the routine. "It's not the photo I came for," he said. "It's the little bird inside it." He tapped the snitch with a finger. "A magical creature?" Rita peered closer, surprised. At first, she hadn't recognized it. "A golden bird?" Rita said, frowning as if the name were on the tip of her tongue. "I know it. It's connected to Quidditch. It's called the Golden Snidget," Roger supplied. "It used to be the game ender at Quidditch matches. Back then, matches didn't finish until the Snidget was killed." Right. That's it. The Golden Snitch was modeled after it." Rita peered at the photograph on the table. "They've been extinct for centuries. When was this taken?" "Today." Roger met her skeptical look and repeated, "Today. I have the whole hatching caught on film." "Really?" "Incredible. Absolutely incredible." Rita sprang to her feet and began to pace, waving the photo. After hundreds of years, it's back in the wizarding world. Right now, of all times. Next year, the Quidditch World Cup is in Britain. The International Quidditch Federation and the Ministry of Magic will do anything to get their hands on it. Roger interrupted with a small cough. "Excuse me, Miss Skeeter. The Golden Snidget is classified as a Class 4X magical creature. International law forbids its sale." Rita only smiled, as if she had anticipated this. "It wouldn't have to be a sale," she said. "A donation, a transfer of custody, call it what you like. They might even offer you a Merlin order in exchange." "They've already contacted me," Roger said. "They smelled a story before the Snidget even hatched." Rita's enchanted quill scrawled across her notebook in neat, cutting strokes. The headline it formed read, "The International Quidditch Federation and the Department of Magical Games and Sports once bullied a wizard into handing over golden Snidget eggs. In their hunger for prestige, they showed no responsibility. Chairman Hassan Mustafa may be a figurehead who loves his honors, but the bulked-up athletes and stiff bureaucrats have no idea how to care for a creature like this." Roger watched the words and clicked his tongue in admiration. She could wound with a pen and leave no visible scar. "What were they offering?" she asked, already thinking of copy to sell. "Empty honors and promises," Roger said, lifting his teacup. The black tea was fragrant and strong, the kind that needed no milk. Rita nodded. She knew Roger was bargaining. Why else would he have volunteered such details? "Be specific," she pressed. "The honors, their offers. What did they promise? I know the International Quidditch Federation pays handsomely. One could practically live on the salary." "It wasn't about money." Rita's face fell a little. "We have great Quidditch players at Hogwarts, but they never get scouted. If you cooperate, professional teams will come to the school. They even dangled a Merlin order." Suppression and enticement. Rita breathed, delighted. The phrase itself was an article. Tomorrow's paper will run this as a special report. She opened her notebook and grinned. "No need to rush, though," Roger said. "The return of the Golden Snidget is a rare event. It should be used to show the wizarding world can right its wrongs. If covered well, the whole magical community will thank you," he added. Rita toyed with her quill, thinking of another Merlin order to add to her mantle. "But if you don't publish, how will it reach people?" she asked. "That's easy," Roger proposed. "The World Cup is coming. Run a series on Quidditch in the Daily Prophet, history pieces, quizzes with prize money. I'll sponsor the prizes. Articles like Quidditch Marsh, the secret behind 150 points, lay the groundwork, and wizards will finally regret having driven the Golden Snidget to extinction. This beautiful creature was hunted to death by wizards." Rita clapped her hands and declared, "The glory of Quidditch is built on the corpses of golden Snidgets." Her red lipstick curved into a triumphant smile. The sharper the condemnation of Quidditch, the more precious a living Snidget would become. Truth was useful if it could wound. Facts were weapons. "That sentence is too long for a headline," she mused. "Don't use it as a headline," Roger said. Rita's quill flew. She composed an opening so melodramatic it was delicious. "Through the window of the Prophet office, I saw a small wizard gazing longingly at the Quidditch shop. My heart trembled. What darkness do our children yearn for? As we revel in the game, as we roar at a final score, who thinks of the innocent lives this glory required?" I opened an ancient book and found my tears staining the pages. The International Quidditch Federation, the Department of Magical Games and Sports, the broom manufacturers. This community of interest has buried the ugly history of Quidditch. Ferocious melees, brutal attacks. Each match could have been the last flight of a golden snidget. Once free spirits, they were consumed by our entertainments. Can a sport born of extinction be called noble? Can the lure of 150 points and the golden snitch blot out the sins of the past? I looked to the sky, those joyous birds, their silhouettes fading like smoke. In Quidditch's glorious glare, in a forgotten corner, cry the birds that cannot find their way home. Roger couldn't help applauding. You could question Rita Skeeter's ethics. You could not question her talent for stirring a crowd. I'd tweak one bit, he suggested. Say, I read Quidditch through the ages half the night and could read between the lines one phrase, man-eating. Oh, Rita purred. Roger, you do amaze me. If the other reporters at the paper had even a fraction of your flair, I wouldn't lose sleep over sales. Don't make it too lethal, he warned. If this runs full force, Quidditch shops might have to close. They'll reopen, Rita said airily and adjusted the copy on her page, smiling at his suggestion. She looked at him, eyes calculating. Your snidget will become priceless. It could even be described as Quidditch's only hope for redemption. I only want it to be free, Roger said quietly, lifting his cup to clink against hers. He put it plainly. He wanted the snidget to have a chance at life, not to be paraded to feed reputations. Publishing the stories would ensure more than public outrage. The ministry would have to lend support. Minister Fudge was already desperate to change the conversation. Sirius Black's escape from Azkaban had put Fudge's competence in question, and he needed distractions. The Department of Magical Games and Sports and the International Quidditch Federation, too, would squirm. They were all too willing to sacrifice others to save themselves. The Daily Prophet's pieces would be a convenient cudgel. The first articles hit a nerve. From Diagon Alley to Godric's Hollow, from dark wizards to aurors, wizards talked and argued over Rita's condemnations. She returned to the story of Roger's involvement and followed with more special reports. Reflection and debate spread. What did Quidditch mean now, given its history? The upcoming World Cup, once a certainty on home soil, suddenly looked precarious. The Federation fretted, the bureaucrats fretted, broom manufacturers fretted. Anyone who made a living from Quidditch felt exposed. This wasn't just exposing an ugly past. This was threatening people's livelihoods. Prominent politicians, world-famous players, and manufacturers converged on Diagon Alley. Some broom companies, learning that Rita was unmarried, even went so far as to present her with an assortment of handsome young wizards in the hope she would be gentle with her pen. Rita was already building the storm. Roger, for his part, had done his part and left the Prophet office with a small, oddly domestic errand. He was still a student, and the day had not forgiven him. He had to go to Flourish and Blots for textbooks. Flourish and Blots was busier than usual. Staff scurried between towering shelves, and the manager paced nervously as they wrestled with a shipment of absurd new Hogwarts textbooks. The books themselves were the problem. Furry covers, 4 staring eyes, and 2 lines of gilded text that read together, the Monster Book of Monsters. They were kept in cages, snarling like a pack of wild dogs and tearing at one another. The clerks had to use 2-inch-wide leather straps to restrain the wide-mouthed nuisances. The manager cursed as he tried to fasten another strap. I'll never stock these again. That's the 4th time you've said that today, one of the staff grunted, wiping sweat from his brow through thick gloves. Humph, and I've been bitten 6 times. He slapped at a book. The book bit down and wouldn't let go. Ow, help me! Rogge reached out with his wand and murmured a charm. The manager's glove went slick as glass. The monster book couldn't get a grip and slid off. The book nevertheless snapped and lunged for the nearby shelves. Quick, stop it, the manager shrieked. The staffman flung himself forward and pinned the book down. After a struggle, he secured it with a leather strap and collapsed to the floor, out of breath. Whew, that was rough. Rogge, thank you. The manager examined his glove, astonished. Whatever charm Rogge had used actually worked. Flourish and Blots was on the same street as Shadow Apparition House. The manager knew Rogge well enough. You're here for the new textbooks, right? He took the strapped book from the staffman and handed it to Rogge, still grumbling. These Hogwarts professors, strange lot. The last oddity I had was the Invisible Book of Invisibility. I stocked 200 copies, and poof, I couldn't even find a shadow of them. Why not try a revealing charm? Someone suggested. Forget it. That class isn't offered anymore. I'm exhausted every day. Maybe I'll look for them next time Hogwarts runs an invisibility course. He leaned against a shelf and glared at the writhing monster books in their cage. Anything else? He asked. Intermediate Transfiguration, Rogge began, ticking titles off. Standard Book of Spells, Grade 3, Ancient Runes. Before he could finish, the manager had summoned the listed volumes and was handing them over. Rogge shook his head. I meant to buy old textbooks from the second-hand shop. This one's enough. Second-hand books? Rogge, you're a Travis. How can you use second-hand books? The manager's eyes widened. Was a Travis so frugal with knowledge? I can give you 20% off, he added, hoping to change Rogge's mind. Still too expensive, Rogge said. It wasn't money. He liked rummaging for treasures in second-hand shops and haggling with Elvin. Those little pleasures were worth more than a discount to him. The manager, used to such quirks, tossed the coins into the till and sighed. From inside the cage came another crisp tearing sound as one monster book attacked another. I just don't understand, he muttered, despairing. Isn't Kettleburn's textbook good enough? New teachers have their own ideas, Rogge shrugged. Last year when Lockhart taught, you were so pleased. Don't mention Lockhart. The manager grimaced and handed Rogge a copy of a Lockhart-penned memoir, Wizard and Vampire. I stocked over 1,000 copies last year and not one sold. That swindler. He launched a colorful curse. May he choke on water, trip over his own feet, die a bachelor, and have children with no anuses. That harsh, Rogge said, half amused. I hope your new professor is more normal. Hagrid, isn't it? That big fellow. The manager gave a long-suffering sigh. If anyone's trouble, it'll be his classes. And look at these monster books. Can't they just be quiet? He thumped the cage with his cane, trying to hush the commotion. The sound only agitated the book in Rogge's hands. Even bound, it thrashed and glared at him. To the manager and staff's surprise, Rogge loosened the strap. Don't, someone warned. The monster book snapped free and lunged. Rogge didn't hesitate. His fist came down hard on the neck of the thing. A dull thud reverberated through the shelves. Two of its eyes went blank, and a deep print appeared on its furry cover. It was badly battered, but not subdued. It opened its crooked maw at Rogge. Bang! Another blow, and one eye went dark. The staffman glanced on in sympathy. He'd been bitten enough to want to punch it himself. Good show, Rogge. That's satisfying, he cheered. Rogge raised his fist for another strike, but the book suddenly cleared its remaining eye, spat out a red ribbon, and began licking Rogge's hand like a grateful tongue. Cheap trick, Rogge snorted and muttered reparo. The half-crushed book repaired itself instantly, its 4 eyes bright and unblemished, cover restored, and it looked at him like a placid, over-eager pug. The manager and staff stared. If this kid could placate a monster book, surely 2 grown wizards could do the same. Let me try, the staffman volunteered, picking up a cane and swinging open the cage. The cane was immediately bitten by a nearby monster book. Pull it out, the manager barked. Punch it! Watch me! The staffman grinned and started pummeling the book savagely. He hammered it a dozen times, but the book only grew angrier. It dropped the cane and turned on him, teeth flashing. Mamma mia! Help! Save me! He wailed, running around the counter. In seconds, his robes were in tatters. His pants were shredded, revealing pink pygmy puff-printed boxers. The manager gaped, mortified, not daring to intervene for fear of making things worse. Rogge put his foot down on the writhing book. Try stroking its spine gently, he suggested. That calms them. Really? The manager peered, wide-eyed, and cautiously knelt. He stroked the book's spine. Its struggles waned. Rogge released his foot, and the staffmen scrambled back, trembling. Seeing the change, the manager quickly took a leather strap and handed it to the embarrassed clerk. Do it, he urged. It doesn't bite. The clerk protested at first, then, remembering his shredded trousers, hurriedly stroked the book's spine. It became placid. He bound it and rushed off to hide his dignity. Thank you, Rogge. Next time you come in, I'll give you wholesale prices. I thought you'd give it to me for free, Rogge quipped. Business is business. Gratitude is gratitude. The manager made a show of dignity as he handed Rogge a hefty volume. Here, Mr. Newt's Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them. It'll help you. How can I accept this? Rogge said, but his hand was quicker than his words. In a blink, he slipped it into his undetectable extension charm bag. I think I can handle these monster books now. He put on his gloves, reached into the cage for his cane, and, with the manager's nervous help, stroked a few more spines until the rest calmed. Leather straps, binding, soon the shop was under control. The manager breathed out a long sigh of relief and watched Rogge go. The monster book in Rogge's hands continued to spit out red ribbons and fawn over him like an obedient dog. Both are wizards. How can there be such a difference? The manager muttered, resigned to more work ahead. Rogge left with his purchases and headed back to the leaky cauldron to wait for a wizard named Green.